Chapter 1481. Naturally, Yang Chendong's actions were to appease the people and tell them that he would not kill the surrendered generals. Secondly, it was to make these people the target of public criticism and make it impossible for them to betray him. After all, in the eyes of some opponents, the closer these nobles and ministers were to the Han people, the more unforgivable their crimes were. Perhaps some people in the crowd understood this, and their faces became ugly. However, for those who were determined to surrender like Nevsky, they did not think so much. Hearing the treatment given by Yang Chendong, they all got on the horse happily, their faces full of excitement. With someone taking the lead, even if the others were unwilling, they could only choose to get on their horses. After all, compared to angering those staunch nationalists, Bugnam of Gojoseon in front of them was not to be trifled with. He could kill them at any time. Everyone got on their horses, and Yang Chendong began patrolling the city with these people. Xia Bei, who had already been instructed, had already planned the route. On the wide road in the city, there were fully armed new Second Army cavalry soldiers on both sides of the road. They were responsible for the security of the periphery. The 2,000 black cavalry soldiers were protecting Yang Chendong, and were responsible for the safety of close quarters. Under such a formation, unless it was an attack from cannons, even a group of soldiers with guns could not threaten Yang Chendong's safety. Even so, along the way, they still encountered a total of 13 attempts to assassinate them, big and small. Some of them were killed by the new Second Army cavalry as soon as they appeared. Some of them relied on their numbers to break through the periphery, but the black cavalry soldiers drew their swords and mercilessly attacked, killing the white Russian soldiers on the streets. By the time they finished patrolling and arrived in front of the palace, many of the black cavalry soldiers' armors were covered in blood. Regarding this, the black cavalry soldiers acted as if they did not hear anything. Perhaps they were used to such scenes and were not moved at all. They were still standing upright on their horses. When Nevsky and the other nobles saw this scene, their bodies trembled, and they looked at Yang Chendong with reverence. In the eyes of Pyotr and the other generals, who were used to seeing blood, they were also amazed by the strength of the black cavalry. They had observed very carefully just now. When the black cavalry soldiers killed people, they did not even blink, and their arms did not tremble at all. It felt like they had done this countless times and were already numb to it. Facing such an army, even without flying balls or black oil, the generals could not help but ask themselves if they could stop them. The result would be the same. During the patrolling the city, more than 1,000 white Russians were killed. Only then did Yang Chendong was satisfied and entered the palace to listen to the reports below. The white, the black and black cavalry soldiers of course, and the white Russian soldiers, the black cavalry, and the black cavalry soldiers. However, all the good things in the palace added up to 40 million silver taels. Of course, this did not mean that the white Russians were poor. In fact, a lot of the wealth was in the hands of the nobles. She had done a rough investigation. If the nobles could only leave with 10% of their wealth, they would have to hand over more than 200 million taels of wealth. From this, it could be seen that they were still very rich. After 2 big battles, Yang Chendong was very satisfied with the harvest he had gained. Especially in the battle against Moscow, he had only sent out 2 flying balls and dropped some black oil. His side had not suffered any losses, and yet he had gained so much. It seemed like it was really worth it. In his joy, Yang Chendong looked at Shibi and said, "Apart from taking out a portion of the spoils for the army to continue expanding, the rest will be split equally between you and Crimson City to develop this place." Hearing that he could keep half of the spoils, Shibi was naturally overjoyed. Yang Chendong had told him about the establishment of the new Second Army. Now that he had so much wealth to support him, if he did not do well, he might as well go home and be a farmer. Shibi was very happy. Yang Chendong also made a request. He wanted this place to undergo a small change every year, and a big change every 3 years. He wanted to make use of the vast land here to become Yangtze's granary. Not only that, but there were also many forests and rich minerals. This place would also become Yangtze's heavy industrial zone. In the future, some of the heavy industrial factories in Crimson City would move here. As the owner of this place, Shibi had to be ready to welcome and cooperate. In order to let Shibi do his work better, Yang Qindong not only gave him the position of commander of the new Second Army, he also gave him the position of governor of the Eastern European province. Yes, the land where the Rossi Principalities and the Golden Horde were located was merged into a new province called the Eastern European province. In comparison, the area it occupied was far larger than any of the provinces under Yang Xie's control. Giving such an important position to Shibi showed how much importance he attached to this place. Shibi knelt down on the spot to express her gratitude. At the same time, she promised that she would do her best to live up to Yang Qindong's kindness of recognizing her and promoting her. Yang Qindong did not doubt Shibi's loyalty. If Shibi had other thoughts, she would have surrendered when she was surrounded by the Baiming army. Shibi only trusted Shibi. If Shibi gave her too much power, there would be accidents. Yang Qindong proposed that officials from Crimson City and other provinces would be sent to cooperate with Shibi. Not only that, but the position of governor of the Eastern European province would also have to be given to Shibi. A person could be a political and military leader during special times, but it would not last long. In this regard, Shibi naturally agreed. If Shibi was allowed to continue working, why would he worry? It was not a good thing for a person to have too much power. Shibi did not want to live in fear every day. After Shibi's other matters were settled, Yang Qindong held a meeting with Nikovsky and the others. Yang Qindong took out all the regions except Crimson City for everyone to choose. According to Yang Qindong, these people could not stay in the Eastern European province. Otherwise, he would not be at ease. These people would also live very carefully. It would be better for them to move out and choose a new place to live. They would face an unfamiliar environment there. They would not be able to find their people there. They would not even be able to find people who could speak Russian. They could only communicate in Chinese. In the end, after a few years, they would gradually assimilate into the third-class Han people. Everyone was relieved that Yang Qindong had given them a way out. Not to mention, Yang Qindong had allowed them to take away 1/10 of their current wealth. With money, they wouldn't have a bad life anywhere. At that moment, everyone began to choose a new place to live in. Fortunately, Yang Xie's territory was large enough for everyone to choose. They would not have a chance to meet again. During this time, Pyotr, Sergei, and several other important generals also expressed their desire to continue serving in the army. They were different from Boris. Boris was indebted to the Grand Duke of Blindness. Now that he had betrayed his old master, how could he still serve the Han people? But Pyotr and Sergei were different. They were still in their prime and wanted to make a name for themselves. Especially after seeing the strength of the Han army, they wanted to join and make a name for themselves. For this kind of request, Yang Qindong did not hesitate to refuse. The reason why he used the generals of the Golden Horde was that they had been leading cavalry for many years and were truly valiant generals. Secondly, they were uncultured and thought that whoever fed them was the master. Of course, they would be easy to control. But the generals of the Russian Empire were different. They were influenced by the Grand Duke of Blindness and knew right from wrong. People with ideas like these were dangerous existences who could be stabbed in the back at any time. Not to mention, these generals were used to commanding firearms. In Yang Xie, the main force of firearms was the Cold Front. How could such an elite be led by someone from a different race? After Yang Qindong rejected them without hesitation, Pyotr, Sergei, and the others could only suppress this idea. Fortunately, they had looted a lot of good things in the city over the past 10 days. Even if they only kept 1/10 of what they had, the rest was still a shocking amount of wealth. They could live well wherever they went. After making arrangements for the higher-ups of the Russian Empire, the Grand Duke of Blindness, who was detained in the prison, was brought out and sent to the main hall that he used to lead. The difference was that he was no longer the master of the main hall. Instead, he was a prisoner. Considering that the Grand Duke of Blindness had poor eyesight, Yang Qindong deliberately arranged for him to sit 2 steps in front of him. The old man and the young man looked at each other, sizing each other up. In his previous life, Yang Qindong had dealt with a lot of Russians. Most of them were fond of wine, greedy, and terrifyingly arrogant. Although the country's economy was not doing well, the weapons they produced were even feared by developed countries. In the common words of the common people, they were a fighting nation. Yang Qindong made the first move, taking advantage of the fact that the other party had yet to gain momentum to destroy them. He effectively suppressed the other party's development and also trampled on the other party's arrogant mentality, making it worthless. Now that he was the victor, Yang Qindong did not stop him from observing the Grand Duke of Blindness, who was a very important figure in Russian history. The Grand Duke of Blindness was also sizing up Yang Qindong. Although his eyesight was very limited, he was relying on his conscience. After a few observations, he could not help but sigh. This Han man, who was more than 20 years younger than him, gave him a feeling of invincibility. Chapter 1482. Such a person would not make people feel threatened by his every move and would even make people want to get close to him. However, when one developed a hostile heart, one would realize that the other party had no flaws. His many years of experience told him that such an opponent was the most terrifying. "Young man, you have won, but I don't know how to deal with the Rossi people." "Oh, and what about the 5,000 palace guards who are absolutely loyal to me?" Yang Qindong, who could not find the other party's flaws and whose breathing was very stable, made the Grand Duke of Blindness unable to find a way to break through. Thus, he simply took the initiative to attack. He also wanted to see how this Han Chinese man would deal with the affairs of the Rossi principalities. Over the years, if there were two things that the Grand Duke of Blindness was most proud of, they would be having such a capable son like Ivan and the fact that he had changed the mentality of the majority of the Rossi people, enlightening them and giving them a strong sense of belonging to their nation. Such people were the least likely to be influenced by others and the least likely to accept the leadership of a foreign race. If things went wrong, they would be in trouble and might even rise again and repeat their glory. It was precisely because of his confidence in these people that the Grand Duke of Blindness asked this question. At the same time, he was also making things difficult for Yang Qindong. In an instant, the Grand Duke of Blindness raised two difficult questions. When Yang Qindong heard this, he was not the slightest bit displeased. On the contrary, he chuckled. "What's wrong? Are these two things very difficult for you? Aren't they difficult?" The Grand Duke of Blindness was somewhat disturbed by Yang Qindong's smile, but he really could not think of any way to solve the problem, so he still firmly believed that the other party was just being stubborn. He was probably having a headache now. Was it difficult? In Yang Qindong's eyes, it was really not a big deal. It was still the same sentence. The land of Eastern Europe would not be the first territory that Yang Xia conquered, nor would it be the last. This territory should be managed in the same way as the territory they conquered before. Therefore, Yang Qindong simply smiled at the blind duke's question as if two old friends were chatting. With a pleasant countenance, he casually recounted how he conquered other places, moved the people away from their original places, and finally achieved great harmony. Even though Yang Qindong only gave a rough explanation, it still took him half an hour. After finishing his explanation, Yang Qindong quickly took a big gulp of tea to moisten his throat. Then, he looked at the Grand Duke of Blindness with a smug look like a child who wanted to be praised by an adult for doing the right thing. For some reason, when facing the Grand Duke of Blindness, the other party gave him this feeling. He could relax and say what he wanted to say. On the other hand, the Grand Duke of Blindness had an ugly expression on his face. Previously, he thought that the Russian people had been partially liberated under his rule. With such people, it would be difficult for anyone to rule them except for the Russian leader. However, he never expected that the young Han Bugnam of Gojoseon would think of such a method to migrate and divide the people. The method was so simple and undeniably effective that it could only make the Grand Duke of Blindness dumbfounded. At the same time, he also knew very well that if what had just been said was true, the strength of the so-called Russian ancestors would be greatly reduced. Next, they would inevitably be divided and ruled together. Finally, they would be annihilated in the wheel of history. He was shocked by Yang Xia's strength in his heart. Without such a large territory, it was impossible to do this. Moreover, the money needed to be spent was also incalculable. It would be difficult for any emperor to make such a choice because it required countless investments in the early stages in exchange for long-term stability in the future. However, these problems were no longer problems in the eyes of this young man. He had already used countless facts to prove that this path could be taken, and the returns would not be too low. The Grand Duke of Blindness couldn't help but praise the other party in his heart. He was thinking how good it would be if the person who did this was a descendant of the Russian clan. If there was such a talent, he was willing to give all his efforts to help the other party. However, now it seemed that the rulers of the world in the future would only be the Han people, and they could only be the Han people. Any powerful ethnic group would be inferior in front of the Han people and would need to look up to them. While the Grand Duke of Blindness was amazed by this big move, he suddenly thought of something. His expression changed, and he said, "What about my 5,000 palace guards? How are you going to deal with them? Kill them?" "As you wish, of course, I will kill them all. Not only them, but many people in the city who are unwilling to migrate, or young adult men who show a little resistance, will also die. You know, they are not a small force of opposition. If I don't deal with them, I'm afraid that during the migration process, these people will not be obedient and will create a lot of difficulties for my army. I don't want them to hurt my soldiers and the good people in the future because of a moment of kindness." Yang Chendong said with a matter-of-fact look, and then looked at the Grand Duke of Blindness, as if he would do the same if he were in the Grand Duke's shoes. The Grand Duke of Blindness sighed. At this time, he finally understood why the Han King in front of him was able to achieve such great achievements at such a young age. Naturally, he was a master who killed decisively. It was a pity that they had underestimated such a powerful opponent. If they had known this earlier, they would have put down all their prejudices and joined forces with the Golden Horde. That way, even if they were defeated, it would have taken a long time. If they were careful, it was not impossible to turn defeat into victory in the process. But everything was already history and could no longer be changed. The Grand Duke of Blindness closed his mouth tightly, with an expression that said, "You're amazing, I admit defeat, and you'll kill me quickly." "What? Do you want to die?" Seeing the faint death intent from the Grand Duke of Blindness, Yang Chendong asked with a grin. "Yes." The Grand Duke of Blindness nodded honestly, "I'm old, and I've done what I should, but I still can't change the result. Now I can only die to thank the world. You're afraid of being used by me, such as using you to lure young Master Yi Fan out." Yang Chendong did not believe that, and just pointed out the other's inner thoughts. At this moment, the dying old man suddenly seemed to have recovered his youth, and the momentum of his whole body changed. When he looked at Yang Chendong, his eyes were full of killing intent. Obviously, this sentence had touched the dragon's reverse scale. "What? Did I say what's in your heart, or do you want to beg me to spare your son's life?" Yang Chendong continued to chuckle. "What do you want?" The Grand Duke of Blindness, whose aura had soared, only maintained it for less than 2 breaths before returning to the appearance of an amiable old man. Clearly, he was now in an absolute disadvantage. Even the change in aura just now could not be maintained for long. "What else can I do?" "Of course, I have to eliminate the roots. To be honest, I never underestimate any opponent, especially the successor personally cultivated by you, the Grand Duke of Blindness. It's absolutely impossible to not find Yi Fan. You can rest assured that he will definitely be found. As I said before, I will migrate the entire city, including all the dignitaries and civilians. At that time, I will find some people who have seen young Master Yi Fan and let them recognize him one by one. I think he won't be able to fly out even if he has wings. Am I right, Grand Duke of Blindness?" Looking at Yang Chendong as if he was talking about a very ordinary thing, the Grand Duke of Blindness sat down on the chair. He finally admitted in his heart that this Yang Chendong was a devil who opened his bloody mouth and could devour all enemies and opponents. If he really migrated the people in the city one by one like a sieve, Yi Fan who was hiding in the city really couldn't escape. At that time, he naturally couldn't avoid the risk of being wiped out. In that case, he wouldn't be able to die in peace. What do you want? What are you going to do? What do you want me to do? Finally getting to the point, Yang Chendong laughed. It's very simple. I need your cooperation. I need you to help me find him. As for the conditions? You can try to mention it, but I can't guarantee that I will agree to it. I'm going to find my son and give him to you. You're not joking, right? Laughing out loud, the Grand Duke of Blindness changed his indifferent demeanor from before. Yang Chendong didn't laugh this time. Instead, his expression was incomparably serious. He stared at the Grand Duke of Blindness' face. He wanted the other party to know that he was serious and didn't have the slightest intention of joking. Sure enough, under such a gaze, the Grand Duke of Blindness gradually stopped laughing. When he looked at Yang Chendong, his expression slowly became serious until he finally lowered his head. He was weighing the pros and cons of the matter in his heart. If he didn't help the other party would just spend more time and energy. At that time, his son wouldn't be able to escape either. On the contrary, if he cooperated, he might be able to fight for a way out for his son in the future. After so many years of observation, he knew better than anyone how powerful his son was. It would only take a certain amount of time for his son to grow into an eagle that could spread its wings and soar. Then, he would be able to achieve great things. Yang Chendong wasn't in a hurry. This time, he met the Grand Duke of Blindness in addition to admiring the demeanor of this historical figure. He also came to persuade the other party to cooperate with his work. As he said earlier, he could indeed release the Rossi people one by one out of the city. In the end, he believed that Ivan wouldn't be able to escape. This was because he believed that not only him, but there were also many people who wanted to capture Ivan to relieve their worries, such as Nevsky and Peter. But it was undeniable that doing so would be a big project. It was just for one person, yet he had to pay such a huge price and time. If Yang Chendong didn't know Ivan's future achievements, he wouldn't have chosen this method. Chapter 1483. But if the Grand Duke of Blindness was willing to cooperate, it would be completely different. Nobody knew a son better than his father. With this person's help, it would be extremely easy to find Ivan. In this way, it would save a lot of time. Of course, it was normal to pay some price for this. Everything depended on what the other party asked for. The Grand Duke of Blindness sat there in silence for a long time, weighing the gains and losses in his heart. In the end, he sighed and said, "In that case, I have 3 conditions." Try to say it. Yang Chendong did not arrogantly say that he would agree even if the Grand Duke of Blindness had 100 conditions. He also answered very cautiously. It was enough to prove that he was very cautious when facing an opponent at the level of the Grand Duke of Blindness. First, please keep the name of Moscow. Please also leave some people who are not a threat in your eyes. After all, this is the place where the Ross clan lived. We still need them to stay as witnesses. At least we won't let them disappear from this land so quickly and prove that the Ross clan was once the owner of this place. After the Grand Duke of Blindness finished speaking, he looked expectantly at Yang Chendong's reaction. In this regard, Yang Chendong just urged, "There are 2 more conditions. Say them together." Okay. Second, I can help you find Ivan, but you have to promise not to hurt him and you have to swear a heavy oath. Also, you can't kill the 5,000 palace guards. You can give them to Ivan to lead. I will persuade him to become a foreign division in your Han army. Presumably, you still have a lot of places to fight and occupy, so you will always need manpower. Since you are so optimistic about Ivan's strength, presumably his addition will make you like a tiger that has grown wings, right? Third, I want the heads of Nikev and Peter. They betrayed us, so they must pay the price. That's all. As long as Bugnam of Gojoseon can agree, I will do my best to help you. I will even come forward to appease the hearts of the people in the city. You know, these people have feelings for this Grand Duke. Many of them are still willing to believe me. The 3 conditions were stated by the Grand Duke of Blindness. Next, it was time to wait for Yang Chendong's reply. In this regard, Yang Chendong, who was smiling, had a mocking look in his eyes. She had already become a prisoner, so how could she still make such an outrageous request? Was it because the other party was used to being domineering, or was it because he was too gentle? He decided to let the other party know who had the final say in this place at this moment. I'm sorry, but I can't fulfill any of your 3 conditions. While objecting, Yang Chendong continued, it seems that some people still don't understand the situation. Do you really think that we can't find Ivan without your help? The more he spoke, the colder Yang Chendong's expression became. Men, bring those 5,000 palace guards to the square and kill them all. Yes, young master. Young heir, who had been waiting at the side for a long time, was waiting for these words. He agreed and turned around to leave. The blind duke was forced to panic. Wait a minute. He didn't expect Yang Chendong to be so decisive. Since it was a negotiation, of course one side would offer a sky-high price, and the other side would pay back the money. How could one flip the table just because one side disagreed? If that was the case, how could the game not continue? Of course, through this test, he could also see that Yang Chendong was not the nobles he had come into contact with before. This was a very principled and powerful person. He would not tolerate the slightest doubt or criticism from others. The Grand Duke of Blindness shouted for Yang Chendong to stop. He lowered his head and asked Yang Chendong to propose amendments. And this was exactly what he wanted. His performance just now was just to intimidate the blind duke. Reality also proved that a paper tiger was a paper tiger. As expected, he was not intimidated. Alright, since that's the case, this king will propose the final regulations. When he said final, it meant that the following words could not be questioned or refuted. If the blind duke still did not agree, then there was nothing to talk about. First, all the people in the city must be evacuated. Not a single one is left. This is unquestionable. Not even the slightest trace of your people can be left here. Second, as long as Ivan performs well, he can be spared and be given a chance to redeem himself. But he will always be watched. Once he is found to be disloyal, he will be beheaded without mercy. On the other hand, if he is willing to work honestly, this king can guarantee that he will not be killed. As for the 5,000 guards, only 500 of them can be allocated. The other 4,500 will be sent to other armies. You should know that it is impossible for this person to have too much military power before he has enough trust. Also, as the Grand Duke, you also need to make a public speech to express your submission to us, the Han people. This is also an important reason for your son's safety. As for the third point, Nekov and the others are traitors in your eyes, but in this king's eyes, they are meritorious people. It is impossible to harm them. It is best if you understand this point, even if you don't, you have to understand. With the same unquestionable tone, Yang Chendong refuted the 3 points raised by the blind duke. It could even be said that this was not just a rebuttal. 2 of the 3 points had been directly rejected. Even the remaining point had been discounted, and Yang Chendong had even taken the opportunity to raise his own opinion. Normally, such an answer would not satisfy the Grand Duke of Blindness. But the other party actually quickly nodded in agreement. Good, I hope Bugnam of Gojoseon can keep his promise. Otherwise, this duke will not let you go even if I die and become a ghost. My Rossi people will also disturb your peace. When he said these words, although the blind duke's eyes revealed an unquestionable momentum, there was a trace of craftiness in his eyes. It was clear that this answer had already satisfied him. Originally, what the blind duke wanted was the safety of his son. Through the conversation with Yang Chendong just now, he already knew that the Han man in front of him, Bugnam of Gojoseon, had strong means, strong capital, and superb abilities that had exceeded his previous expectations. Unless this person died one day, it would be a nightmare for anyone to be his enemy, and there was no chance of winning. His son could not be this person's opponent. Since that was the case, it was better to submit to this person. There was nothing safer than this. Only by ensuring his own safety could he have the opportunity to look forward to his own grand plan. And once something happened to Yang Chendong, it would be the day when the Rossi clan rose again. The blind duke did not doubt what Yang Qindong said to him. Although he also knew that moving the entire city out one by one and screening them one by one was indeed a very laborious task and would take a lot of time, it was undeniable that this was indeed a good way to find Ivan. If he really could not find Ivan, he did not doubt that this young king would rather kill all the unidentified people in the city. Once he really did that, it would be unknown how many heads would fall to the ground. It would also be tantamount to completely destroying the hope of the Rossi clan's rise. In contrast, this was what he could not tolerate. As long as there was still hope, it was worth it for the blind duke to do anything. He seemed to be a person who was born to make the Rossi clan strong and was willing to do anything for this goal, even death. He was not even afraid of death. It was just agreeing to a few of Yang Qindong's conditions. What was the big deal? Astonishment flashed across Yang Qindong's face when the Grand Duke of Blindness agreed to the conditions so readily. Seeing this, the Grand Duke of Blindness finally revealed a smile that hadn't appeared in a long time. What? Bugnam of Gojosian, don't tell me you want to go back on your word? Go back on my word? How is that possible? Yang Qindong shouted as if someone had stepped on his sore spot. He looked like he was pretending to be a tough guy. Since these words came from this king will certainly fulfill his promise. Then it's a deal. Next, I'll have to ask Bugnam of Gojosian to invite some people to be witnesses. You know, if there's no guarantee, I won't dare to trust my former enemy. You would do the same. The blind duke was happy that his plan had succeeded. Of course. Yang Qindong also looked like he was willing to accept his loss. Then, he snapped his fingers and ordered someone to call over the high-ranking generals of the 5-star army in Moscow and a group of senior officials from the Rossi kingdom. He wanted to swear in front of everyone to prove that he was serious and at the same time dispel the blind duke's doubts. After doing all this, Yang Qindong seemed to be in a bad mood. It will take some time for these people to come. This king is a little tired and needs to rest now. After saying that, he turned and left without waiting for the blind duke's reaction. Beta Persei followed him. When the two walked out of the hall, Beta Persei saw that there was no one around, so he hurried to Yang Qindong's side and said, "Young master, did that old guy make you angry? If so, this little one will go back and kill him now. That way, no one will know the content of the previous conversation." "No need." Yang Qindong replied with a smile. Where was the angry look from just now? Just as the blind duke asked for a sky-high price, why wouldn't he pay? No one knew Ivan's power better than him. If he didn't find such a person, he wouldn't even be able to sleep in peace. In contrast, it was just agreeing to some of the other party's conditions. What was the big deal? Don't forget that Yang Qindong swore that as long as Ivan didn't rebel, he wouldn't do anything to him. But the other party was originally an ambitious person. As long as the opportunity was right, how could he not rebel? Chapter 1484. What? What if there's no chance? Yang Qindong can create opportunities for him. I don't believe that the other party won't fall into my trap. If that's the case, I won't feel guilty at all after killing this person, and all the efforts of the blind archduke today will be in vain. It was with this idea that Yang Qindong reluctantly agreed to the other party's second request. As for deliberately pretending to be angry, it was just to confuse the blind archduke and not give the other party a chance to regret. After all, even if all the people in the city were moved out, they might not necessarily be able to find Ivan. What if the other party hid in a certain tunnel in the city and didn't go out? Could it really be possible to tear down the entire Moscow city and dig 3 feet into the ground? How much time and cost would it take? It was just for a person who didn't have the ability to pose a threat, so it was really a bit of a fuss. With their own thoughts, everyone was quickly summoned. In front of everyone, Yang Qindong made an oath in the name of King Wunan of Damyang that as long as the blind archduke found Ivan and sent him to him, not only would he not kill this person, but he would also give this person the power to lead troops. He also promised that unless this person rebelled or made a real move, Yang Qindong would never kill this person. Violating this oath would incur the wrath of the gods. Yang Qindong made a statement in public, and the blind archduke was overjoyed. In front of everyone, he proposed several locations, and the well-prepared black cavalry divided into several groups to search for him. About an hour later, a stooped Ross clan man dressed in civilian clothes appeared in the hall. In the past, there were many people who pretended to be crazy in order to achieve great things. For example, Go Jian, who endured hardships, could even eat feces when he was crazy. Mr. Zhu Di of the Great Ming Dynasty also pretended to be crazy for a long time in order to dispel Zhu Yunwen's suspicion of him at that time. It was just that Yang Qindong had never seen those people, unlike the current Ivan, who he saw with his own eyes. He didn't know what was applied on his face, but it made his skin look a lot older. There were more wrinkles on his face, showing that he was far older than his age. There was also that stooped body, which didn't seem artificial at all, as if he was born like this. Coupled with that silly smile, he really looked like a mentally retarded child. There was no trace of the young and high-spirited young Master Yi Fan in his every move. He didn't seem to have the temperament that a noble should have, but Yang Qindong was still very sure that the other party was Ivan. Otherwise, the black cavalry wouldn't have brought such a person into the hall. Just as Yang Qindong was looking at this fool who the black cavalry said was sleeping in a horse barn, the blind Grand Duke, who was also standing in the hall, suddenly spoke. "My son, Ivan, your father-in-law has already talked to the King Wunan of Daimyong. You won't be guilty, and you still have the right to lead the troops. Now, please restore your true body." As soon as these words came out of his mouth, the stooped man standing in the hall, whose eyes were originally dim, suddenly shone brightly. Then, the man suddenly straightened his body like a magic trick. As he stretched out his hand, some of the disguises on his face were also removed. A spirited and handsome young man in his 20s appeared in front of everyone. How could those who knew Ivan not recognize him? Who else could he be if he wasn't the wise young Master Ivan of the Ross clan, who was predicted to appear once in a few hundred years? "I finally caught you." Yang Qindong saw everyone's reaction and revealed a victorious smile on his face. At the same time, he was also shocked. Thinking about it, if this person was really dressed like this, even if everyone in the city had to go through a sieve, they might not be able to find him. And if he let him escape, he was really worried that the new Second Army commander, Sherbet, who was left behind to guard the city, might not be able to defeat him. Ivan was finally found. Yang Qindong also fulfilled his promise and gave him the position of Chiliarch, which consisted of 500 ordinary Mongolian soldiers and 500 palace guards. Anyone could see that the 500 Mongolian soldiers were there to keep an eye on Ivan and prevent him from doing anything that would endanger the 5-star army. With Ivan captured, the Rossi duchies no longer had any chance to make a comeback. Yang Qindong could finally rest assured and bid farewell to the Rossi duchies and prepare to leave. Before that, the new Second Army was also formed. Unexpectedly, the officers used were basically the same as the original members of the new Second Army. The commanders were Qiao Chao, the commander of the 104th Army, Li Jun, the commander of the 105th Army, Wu Hui, the commander of the 106th Army, Yang Chunfeng, the commander of the 107th Army, and Su Liang, the division commander of the army. The 4 division commanders were all promoted by 1 rank and became division commanders. The original division commander Su Liang was also promoted by 2 ranks and was promoted to division commander. The reason why all of them were recruited was to make it easier for Sherbet to manage them. Everyone was familiar with each other and could save a lot of time. Secondly, this place was remote and not many people were willing to come. Even if they were willing to come, it would take time. Since that was the case, it was better to put these people to good use first. As for whether they were suitable or not, time would tell. If it really didn't work out, he could just change them again. At the same time that the new Second Army was established, Yang Qindong established the Far East Army in the name of the Army Commander-in-Chief. The commander was Chen Bo, and the division commander under the army was Dai Kuo of the 108 Army, Kong He of the 109 Army, Shi Xiaolan of the 110 Army, Ma Hong of the 111 Army, and the division commander Wu Ba of the army. Similarly, the old members of the Far Eastern Army were promoted, and the division commander was promoted to division commander. In this way, it meant that there were a total of 8 armies and 2 division commanders in this area. Even if something happened, these people were enough to solve the problem and there was no need to transfer troops from outside. After giving 2 orders in a row, Yang Chendong was ready to leave Eastern Europe. Speaking of which, it had been 3 years since he led the troops into the Far Eastern region. It was much longer than the time needed to conquer any land. Fortunately, the harvest this time was big enough and the territory was enough. The slaves and gold and silver seized were also far beyond his expectations. At the end of August, 1463 AD, Yang Chendong gathered a total of 400,000 troops, including the world's first cavalry army, the 3rd Cavalry Army, the Cold Front 2nd Division, a total of 100,000 troops, 100,000 Russian troops, and 200,000 Mongolian troops. For the difference, the Mongolian troops were the enemy, and the Mongolian troops were the surrendered troops, and were a part of the 5-star army. Setting out from the city of Moscow, with the pretext of pursuing Shamask, the leader of the Cherkassk people, and Maxim, the leader of the Novgorod city-state, the troops were directed towards the Rossi principalities, and the Lithuanian state, which was located to the south of the present Eastern European province. Before this, the leader of the Alans, Maulayan, Tugnev of Vyatka, and Vanya of Pskov were either killed by the 5-star army, or they surrendered due to their powerful strength. Only a few generals such as Shamask and Maxim managed to escape. Even so, the number of troops they brought with them when they escaped was very limited, only 20 to 30,000 people in total. However, Yang Chendong still chased after them with the 400,000 troops, which was more or less like using a cannon to kill a mosquito. However, there was an ulterior motive. The 5-star army needed a reason to expand their territory, and they also needed an excuse. At the end of the 9th month of the year 1463, the 400,000 men of the 5-star army captured the capital of Lithuania, which was trying to shelter Shamask and the others. Lithuania was thus destroyed and became another part of the Yang faction. Unfortunately, they still couldn't find Shamask and the others. But it didn't matter, there was already news that they escaped to Poland with their troops, so they just had to continue the chase. Therefore, the 5-star army's 400,000 troops continued to move forward, taking down Poland, Hungary, and other small countries. They brushed past the border of the Roman Empire and entered Serbia, Bulgaria, and other small countries. Facing the aggressive Han army, these countries had no choice but to surrender, as if they were repeating the scene of the Mongol Empire many years ago. In the end, the 5-star army successfully took down the Byzantine Empire that surrendered and appeared behind the Ilkhanate. Right now, it was already February, 1464 AD. It was snowing heavily, and it hindered the traffic. As a result, the 5-star army had no choice but to stop and rest. Relying on their military cotton coats and warm-down jackets, as well as high-waisted riding boots, even in the coldest weather, the 5-star army soldiers rarely lost any members because of this. This was the benefit of having powerful equipment. How could an army wearing thin clothes be a match for the 5-star army in warm jackets? However, not everyone was a Han soldier who fought against the M Empire and supported the Empire, and they had a strong sense of trust and obedience. The achievements that the 5-star army had achieved along the way, as well as the glory that they had created, had already spread throughout this region. If it weren't for the heavy snow, they would have stopped and killed their way here. Harsanhan of the Ilkhanate was the closest to the 5-star army, and he was the most nervous one. Even though the heavy snow made it hard to travel, Harsanhan still used every second he had and wandered around, trying to find more reinforcements. Finally, he managed to convince Khan Amur of the Timur Empire. Under his influence, more and more Khan came together and held a military meeting to defend against the 5-star army. Great Khan Amur. His name, in Mongolian, means peace. In fact, he wanted to be a peaceful Khan and live a peaceful life. But in reality, life rarely went as planned. Chapter 1485. The Timur Empire could be said to be an existence not inferior to the Golden Horde. Moreover, because of the lush grasslands around it, their development was rather fast. But it was precisely because of this favorable environment that ambitious people appeared one after another. The originally large Timur Empire was thus divided into several clans, like the Norman Khanate, the Ilkhanate, the Kazakh Khanate, the Crimean Khanate, and the Kazan Khanate. They were all once part of this empire. From this, one could see just how powerful the Timur Empire was. If not for the fact that it was divided, no one around it would be a match for it. These Khanates, who usually had their own agendas, were finally able to come together in the face of the powerful enemy, the Five-Star Army. Within the tent of Great Khan Amur, Saihan Khan of the Norman Khanate, Hassan Khan of the Ilkhanate, Janilbek Khan of the Kazakh Khanate, Haji Khan of the Crimean Khanate, Ulugh Khan of the Kazan Khanate, as well as Yangtze and Ili of the Yusang tribes, had gathered together. King Bao lied. Thanks to the heavy snow, these leaders, who had been nervous about the war, were able to gather together and discuss important matters. From this, one could see just how much pressure the Five-Star Army from the Byzantine Empire was exerting on them. Fortunately, none of them had been idle in this period of time. They had been constantly clashing with the Five-Star Army from the east, so they were already used to the rhythm of war. They weren't that afraid, and after such a long period of war, they were no longer as fearful of cannons as before. But this didn't mean that they weren't afraid of the Five-Star Army. On the contrary, when they learned that the commander of the Five-Star Army behind them was King Wunan of Damyang, every member of the conference became extremely cautious. They had heard far too much about this Yang Chendong. Just the titles he had given him were numerous. For example, the most basic title of King Wunan of Damyang, the title of Heavenly Khan given to them by the grassland, and titles like God of War and God of War. No matter which one it was harsh to the ears, especially the title of Heavenly Khan. In many people's hearts, only their ancestor Genghis Khan could use this title, but now it was used by a Han. This was equivalent to a loud slap to their faces, causing them to blush. But even though they knew this, there was nothing they could do. Facing the Five-Star Army from the east, they could only fight to a draw at most. This was because they had a vast space and complex terrain, which allowed the cavalry to unleash their greatest advantage and suppress the less mobile cannons. This time, facing the Five-Star Army from the west, one could imagine what their chances of victory were. Are you really Han Chinese? Is that really the King Wunan of Damyang? Among the crowd, the Kazakh Khaganate's Khan, Janilbek, said with an angry face. It was no wonder that he would think this way. In the past, when they faced Han Chinese, if they could win, they would take advantage of them and plunder them. If they couldn't win, they would run away. At most, they would write a letter and acknowledge the other party as their master. After a period of time, when they had recovered enough strength, they would be able to launch another expedition. But as a Han Chinese, this Bugnam of Gojoseon did not accept this at all. Wherever he attacked, it would become the territory of the other party. This person would also ferociously move the locals away and make some people who did not belong here live here. This was equivalent to completely erasing everything that once existed here. This was equivalent to cutting the weeds and eliminating the roots. They did not accept surrender, nor did they accept the exchange of benefits. Regarding this point, Janilbek Khan could be said to have experienced it personally. His younger brother Kelai was unfortunately captured by the Five-Star Army. For this matter, he had communicated with the other party many times. He had taken money and wanted to lower his head and acknowledge the other party as his master, but he only wanted to save his brother and not start a war. He wanted peace. Unfortunately, the other party did not accept this at all. The emissary he sent was sent back, but the money he brought was left behind. If they were bandits, then the Five-Star Army were bandits who specialized in robbing bandits. It was really hateful, but there was nothing they could do. This was not consistent with the actions of the Han Chinese. Yang Chendong's actions naturally caused Janilbek Khan to question whether the other party was a Han Chinese. And when he said this, at least a few people in the tent showed an expression of agreement. Obviously, they also had the same thoughts. Enough. Seeing that the topic of the meeting was going astray, Amor finally spoke up. With a very serious tone, he said, now is not the time to talk about this. Let's think about how to deal with them. We have already received reports that the Golden Horde in the north has been destroyed by this King Wunan of Daimyong. Not only that, the Ross Principality, which was the enemy of the Golden Horde, was also destroyed. Those two forces were not inferior to us in the slightest. In just 2 years, they were destroyed. If we can't think of a better way, I'm afraid that this will be the lesson for us. The solemn voice caused the tent to quiet down once again. Although they were of the same branch, their ideas and thoughts were different. This made them look down on the self-proclaimed Orthodox Golden Horde from the bottom of their hearts. But this did not mean that they would underestimate the other party's strength. In Amur's words, the other party's strength was not inferior to theirs. But such a powerful Golden Horde was destroyed just like that. It was said that the old Khan Mahama was killed on the spot, and the new Khan Bora was captured alive by the 5-star army. He was beheaded on the spot in New Salai City. This kind of method made their hair stand on end when they heard it. This was an existence that was even more ferocious than them. Having such a person as an enemy really made them panic at all times. Seeing that everyone was silent, Amur spoke again. Do you know why the Golden Horde was defeated? There were 2 reasons. One was that they underestimated the enemy, and the other was that they were not united. Facing such a powerful enemy, they did not take it seriously and were destroyed in the end. Of course, the reason why they were defeated so quickly was largely due to the desertion of the Sherkas and Allans. Since that is the case, I hope that everyone can change these 2 problems. We cannot underestimate the enemy, and we must be united. Yes, for the final victory, we must be united. I, Harson, am the first to swear to the longevity heaven that in the coming battle, I will not be selfish. I will fight for the sake of defeating the 5-star army. Harson Khan of the Ilkhanate was the first to express his attitude. He had no choice. The 5-star army was the closest to his territory. If they attacked, the first one to be attacked would be him. Therefore, he had high hopes for today's joint meeting. The result of this meeting would determine whether the Ilkhanate would continue to exist in the future. After Harson expressed his attitude, everyone looked at each other. Finally, one by one, they stood up and expressed their attitude. For their own survival, for the continuation of their race, they would give up their prejudice and personal conflicts and unite to fight against the 5-star army. Very good. Seeing that everyone had expressed their stance, Amur revealed a knowing smile on his face. Since everyone can see the seriousness of the matter, and also expressed that we will advance and retreat together, then let's discuss. Facing the 5-star army in the west, facing the aggressive Han army, I hope that everyone will do their best. Good, I agree. My Ilkhanate is willing to provide 70,000 cavalry. It was Harson who was the first to express his support. Obviously, in order to survive, he was willing to put in a lot of effort and had a very positive attitude. Previously, when the 5-star army was fiercely attacking Ely, Harson Khan had only sent 10,000 cavalry. Moreover, he had complained about how poor they were. The general idea was that the Ilkhanate did not have many cavalry. However, now that danger was approaching, he was willing to take out 70,000 cavalry. This was enough to prove that he had been hiding his own selfish motives. Good, since it's like this, my Timur Empire is willing to provide 50,000 cavalry. A good start made Amur Khan smile. They were willing to send 50,000 cavalry. As the most powerful and the head of the Khanates, the Timur Empire had already sent 50,000 cavalry to deal with the 5-star army from the east. Now, it was sending another 50,000 cavalry to the west. From this, it could be seen that this person had a good view of the overall situation and knew how to treat everyone equally. With Harson and Amur Khan taking the lead, the other Khanates had no choice but to send soldiers to help. Among them, the Norman Empire sent 50,000, the Kazan Khanate sent 50,000, the Crimean Khanate sent 30,000, the Kazakh Khanate and Yusang sent 20,000, and the Ely Khanate sent 10,000, making a total of 300,000. In an instant, they had gathered 300,000 soldiers. Harson's face was filled with smiles. It seemed that it was not impossible for them to fight against the 5-star army. As long as they could deal a heavy blow to their opponent, they would have a chance to negotiate. At that time, he would be willing to pay tribute every year and call the other party his suzerain. Presumably, they would have a chance to escape this disaster. Yes, Harson had never thought about defeating the 5-star army. He only wanted to fight to a draw and let the other party see his strength. That was enough. After gathering 300,000 soldiers, the next step was to choose a leader. In the end, under Amur Khan's suggestion, Harson became the leader of the army. Perhaps everyone knew that the next battle would be a matter of life and death for the Ilkhanate. Anyone could compromise, but Harson wouldn't do so. They could rest assured that the army would be in the hands of such a person. After Harson obtained the command of the 300,000 cavalry, he publicly declared that he would do his utmost to fight the 5-star army to the end. He wanted to use facts to tell the other party that they, the descendants of the Mongols, were not to be trifled with. He also wanted to prove to the world that they were stronger than the Golden Horde. Chapter 1486. After the meeting, the various Khanates sent their troops to the Ilkhanate one after another. Take Harson Khan for example. After obtaining military power, the first thing he did after returning to the Khanate was not to think about where to fight the 5-star army, but to think about who to send to negotiate with the 5-star army. That's right, negotiation. Even with these 300,000 people, Harson Khan did not think that victory would definitely belong to him. Because as long as a war broke out in his Ilkhanate, no matter who won or lost, the one who would suffer in the end would only be himself. A large number of water plants would be destroyed. How would they survive in the future? It would be best if they didn't fight. The military power he wanted was to increase his confidence in negotiating with the 5-star army. In the past, he only had one Khanate, so naturally, he couldn't compete with the 5-star army. But now, he had 300,000 cavalry. He believed that with such strength, the 5-star army should sit down and have a good talk with him. Therefore, before the 300,000 cavalry from the various Khanates were fully assembled, Yang Chendong had already received the news. What was even more ridiculous was that the person who passed the news was actually the special envoy sent by Harson Khan, Alateng. It was him who told the enemy, the 5-star army, about his side's preparations. Peace talk? Envoy? After hearing Beta Persei's report, Yang Chendong's face was full of suspicion. No wonder he would lose his composure like this. It was because his actions had already told everyone that in front of the 5-star army, there was no such thing as coexistence. Either the whole country would surrender and be occupied by us, or the whole country would be destroyed by us and be occupied by us. Countless facts had already proven this point. Logically speaking, this Ilkhanate should have known, but he still sent an envoy, which greatly exceeded Yang Chendong's expectations. But after a moment of surprise, Yang Chendong thought that this must be because Harson Khan still had hope in his heart for peace. Since that was the case, he might as well make good use of it. In that case, arrange for Ivan to talk with them. Tell Ivan to hold back the opponent, but we still have to attack. Once the snow melts, it will be time for us to launch our attack. Yes, young master, Beta Persei replied with a smile. He could already understand Yang Chendong's intentions. Letting Ivan, who had always hated the Mongols, negotiate with the other party, presumably that envoy called Alateng would not be able to gain the slightest advantage. Or rather, this person wanted to find someone to help him deal with young master. That was the time to kill him. Ivan. Ever since they surrendered to the 5-star army, they had been behaving normally. As his father-in-law had told him before he left, he could not perform too well. Otherwise, Bugnam of Gojoseon would pay close attention to him. However, he couldn't perform too badly. Once he lost his value, the other party could abandon him at any time. As long as he kept a low profile and bided his time, when Yang Chendong was no longer around, he would be able to soar in the sky like a bird and leap in the sea like a fish. Ifan deeply agreed with this point. He had always behaved like this. Along the way from Eastern Europe, he he had destroyed several countries and forces, big and small. He did not make any important contributions, and he had never been a hindrance. No one could find any fault with what he had done. And in the past 6 months of fighting with the army, Ivan had also learned a lot. In particular, the 5-star army's military equipment was far superior to his Ross duchies, which made him envious. Sometimes, he would think in his heart that if he had the same military equipment as the 5-star army, then when the two sides fought, it would be hard to say who would win and who would lose. Of course, he would suppress such thoughts deep in his heart. He was very clear that there was more than one pair of eyes staring at him in the dark. If he made any moves that were out of line, someone would immediately come and take his head. Ivan acted cautiously. Just like that, day after day, he slowly adapted to the life and rhythm of the 5-star army. This made him sometimes think that he was a member of the 5-star army. After the army arrived at the border of the Ilkhanate, the army stopped advancing due to the heavy snow. They began the process of conserving their energy. Sometimes, people couldn't be idle. Perhaps when they were busy, they would forget all their troubles and unhappiness. On the other hand, when they were idle, their minds would constantly wander and think about all kinds of problems. After relaxing his mind, Ivan became a little anxious. He thought about how he and Yang Chendong were only 10 years apart. When Yang Chendong grew old one day, he was afraid that he would also be very old. At that time, would he really have the energy to revive his country? To this question, he didn't have a definite answer. When he thought about how he had to work for his enemy, the 5-star army, at his best age, he felt even worse. He was anxious to find an outlet to vent the unhappiness in his heart. It was at this time that the orders from above came. He was to represent the 5-star army to negotiate with the Ilkhanate's envoy and find a way to stabilize the other party. Ivan, who now had a mission, was like a completely different person. Although he had no choice but to surrender to the 5-star army, it was another way of survival that his father-in-law had planned for him. He wouldn't sincerely serve the 5-star army. However, when the opponent was the Mongols, he was very happy to do some things. For example, he had thought more than once in his heart that if it wasn't for the years of oppression from the Golden Horde, the Ross principalities would have already become independent and strong. They wouldn't have been unable to retaliate in front of the 5-star army. It could also be said that the Mongols of the Golden Horde were the main reason why the Ross principality ended up like this. Since the Ilkhanate was built by the Mongols, they were his enemy. Even if they could not find trouble with the destroyed Golden Horde, they could still take care of the Ilkhanate. That would be a very satisfying thing. Regarding this mission, Ivan gladly accepted. Soon after, he met the envoy from the Ilkhanate, Alteng. This was a fat man. Compared to the skinny face of the people from the prairie, his face was white and his body was fat. It could be seen that this person's standard of living was very good. Usually, people like this were the most afraid of death, and the most afraid of losing everything. This was the first time Ivan met him, and this was the definition he had given him. Alteng was completely unaware. He squinted his small eyes and looked at Ivan. He didn't say anything, but he gave off a feeling of humility. This wasn't surprising. This time, he was here to ask for peace. How could he be arrogant? Furthermore, the propaganda in the Ilkhanate described the 5-star army as having 3 heads and 6 arms, and that they would eat people without spitting out the bones. This caused Alteng's heart to beat faster as soon as he entered the camp. He was really afraid that if he accidentally offended someone, he would be killed here. Once upon a time, the people of the Central Plains had compared the prairie people to unbearably rough existences, and unreasonable people. Now, it was finally their turn to look at the Han people in this way. How could it not be that the strength of the Han people had shocked some people to their souls? Ivan unhurriedly gestured to Alteng, who had entered the tent, to sit down. The other party was very careful. He smiled apologetically and thanked Ivan repeatedly before sitting down. Even so, his butt was only half on the chair. From the looks of it, he was ready to stand up at any time. His posture was no different from a subordinate seeing the fruit of upper eternity. Ivan, who saw all of this, only smiled. He didn't want to expose the other party's intentions, nor did he want to say anything to scare the other party. Because he knew that compared to raising his voice, the content of his words could really scare the other party. You are the one the Ilkhanate sent to surrender, right? No, I am here to negotiate. When he heard the word surrender, Altang's face flushed red, and at the same time, he looked nervous. Negotiate? Ivan purposely frowned, then slowly raised his head and said, Did we say that we want to negotiate? This. Of course not. But we have 300,000 cavalrymen. Before Altang could finish, Ivan's expression changed. What? Are you trying to scare the 5-star army? Or do you think you can defeat us with 300,000 cavalrymen? Are you here to flaunt your strength? Not at all, not at all. Please don't be angry, please don't be angry. We are here to negotiate sincerely. Altang was so scared that he stood up and tried to explain himself. However, Ivan already had an impatient look on his face. After a humph, he stood up and left. Altang was left standing alone in the tent. He didn't know what to do. Why did he leave just like that? What should he do? After a long time, another person entered the tent and said to him, General Ivan is very displeased with your attitude, and he is also very angry. Regarding the negotiation, let's talk about it another day. Envoy, please go back to the tent and rest. Oh, also, don't walk around casually in the tent. Otherwise, if you anger someone you shouldn't, you can lose your head at any time. Thank you for the reminder, thank you for the reminder. Hearing this, a layer of cold sweat appeared on Altang's forehead again, and he hurriedly nodded in response. The first meeting ended on bad terms. This was also Ivan's intention. Wasn't it just stalling for time? Of course, he knew what to do. As long as Altang didn't return to the Ilkhanate, it would create a misconception that there was still a chance to negotiate. This way, the other side might relax their defense, which would give the 5-star army a chance to win. Just as Ivan expected, Altang didn't return immediately. He only sent a message saying that the negotiator of the 5-star army had a bad temper, and that he still needed to communicate with them. However, it wasn't hopeless, so he asked them to wait for a while. Chapter 1487. When the message was sent back, Harsan Khan was overjoyed. He didn't want to fight, especially on his own territory. This was tantamount to destroying his strength, so even if there was a chance for peace talks, he wouldn't miss it. When he heard that there was hope for peace talks, Harsan Khan was overjoyed. He didn't send people to ask why the reinforcements sent by the other Khans hadn't arrived yet. In his opinion, it would be best if there was no war. If the reinforcements didn't arrive, he could save a lot of military provisions. 3 days later, Altang felt that Ivan's anger should have subsided a little, so he asked the 5-star army soldiers guarding outside his tent to pass on a message. He wanted to see General Ivan and continue the negotiations. In the afternoon, in the same big tent, Altang saw Ivan, who reeked of alcohol. When he saw the other party's appearance, Altang was relieved. He wasn't stupid, he was most worried that the other party would use him to lower the vigilance of the Ilkhanate and prepare for war. But now that he saw Ivan's body reeking of alcohol, he thought that the other party wasn't preparing for war, but enjoying it. It seems that they don't like war. That being the case, he was confident that the peace talks would succeed. Sure enough, this time, Ivan was much easier to talk to than the last time. He didn't object to the peace talks proposed by Altang. Instead, he really listened to the other party's various opinions. For example, in the future, King Wunan of Damyang will be honored as the king, annual tribute, as well as how much money will be sent. In the end, when it was time for Ivan to express his opinion, he still said with a face full of alcohol. Good, ha ha ha. In the end, Ivan's subordinates left with the excuse that the general drank too much and needed to sleep, but the matter will be reported to Bugnam of Gojoseon. Alateng, who was left behind, naturally had a look of joy on his face. After he returned to his tent, he quickly wrote a secret letter to Harsan Khan. The general idea was that his side was progressing well, and he hoped that Harsan Khan wouldn't do anything that would provoke the 5-star army. What Ailton didn't know was that Ivan didn't drink alcohol. He just spilled the liquor on his clothes to create this illusion. As for himself, after returning to his own tent, he continued to prepare for the upcoming battle. Not only that, the commander of the 5-star Army's reconnaissance division, Su Yunsheng, had already arranged for people to start investigating the terrain of the Ilkhanate, as well as the distribution of troops. As the saying goes, know thyself and know thy enemy, and thou shalt be victorious in every battle. When he faced the 300,000 Mongolian cavaliers, Yang Chendong was determined to inflict pain on them and destroy their main force. This was because he was really afraid that the fangs of the 5-star army would scare some people. Once these people fought on their own, it would be much more difficult to eliminate them. This was not the result that Yang Chendong wanted to see. For example, General Maxim of the Novgorod city-state under the Rossi Principality, and Shamask, the leader of the Cherkass people who originally belonged to the Golden Horde, had escaped to who knows where. According to the information sent by the intelligence department, the two of them had long lost their former strength and had become stray dogs. It was likely that they no longer had any decent troops by their side. However, Yang Chendong, who had always believed in cutting the weeds and eliminating the roots, would do what he did today and would never leave it until tomorrow, was still somewhat irritating. It was better to avoid trouble if possible. This time, he wanted to eliminate as many of the enemy forces as possible and not leave any future troubles. This required the scouts in the early stages to grasp the situation of the battlefield and do their best to analyze the enemy situation clearly and thoroughly. This was to ensure that they didn't take action, but if they did, it would be a heavy blow. The snow is about to melt. Tell Commander Su Yunsheng to hurry up and understand the enemy's situation. They don't have much time left. Yang Chendong instructed Beta Persei and put him in charge of monitoring this matter. Time passed day by day, and in the blink of an eye, it was the 3rd month of spring. Although spring came later in the Ilkhanate, the day of the attack was getting closer and closer. At this time, the negotiations between Ivan and Alteng had entered a substantial stage. The so-called substantial stage involved the issue of compensation. In other words, what kind of price would the Ilkhanate have to pay to satisfy the 5-star army and make them retreat without fighting? Although the Ilkhanate had never offended the 5-star army and this was a completely unexpected disaster, the bigger the fist, the harder the argument. Since their strength was inferior, they had to hold back even if they had any ideas. Not only did they have to hold back, but Alteng also had to pretend to be very happy and try his best to satisfy the various conditions proposed by Ivan. Only in this way could they stop the war and complete this difficult task. The two of them sat in a military tent. First, Alteng repeated the price that the Ilkhanate was willing to pay. For example, how much gold and silver, how many horses and sheep, and even a certain number of slaves they were willing to hand over to the 5-star army in order to avoid this war. This was the rule between the defeated Ilkhanates. Once one side lost, they would send these things to the winner, in order to ensure that they could barely survive. Ivan sat on the chair expressionlessly, quietly listening to Alteng's narration without any expression on his face. He didn't look happy, nor did he look disappointed. It was this expression that made Alteng a little overwhelmed. He didn't know if the other side was satisfied with what he said, so he always looked at Ivan with an inquiring look. How could he know that at this time, Ivan was thinking about the military order that he had just received in the morning? The higher-ups wanted the troops to prepare for war, and in 3 to 5 days, they would launch a fierce attack. Because of Ivan's recent performance, his original 1,000 soldiers were promoted to 2,000, and he had an additional 1,000 Russian soldiers under his command. Logically speaking, having an army under his command was a good thing, but Ivan wasn't like others. He was very clear that no matter what he did, he wouldn't be able to gain Yang Chendong's complete trust. Since that was the case, why would he be given an additional 1,000 soldiers? Moreover, they were Russian soldiers. He was the young master of the Rus Duchy. Logically speaking, all Russians were his subordinates, his own people. In order to prevent him from betraying, even if he was to increase the number of soldiers, it should be the Mongolian army and not the Russian army. What was Yang Chendong trying to do? Was he testing him? Or was it because his performance had won the other party's trust and he was really going to give him power? After thinking about it, Ivan ruled out the second possibility. In other words, it was impossible to have absolute trust. Then, the only thing left was to test him. Even though he knew that it was a test, Ivan still had more soldiers under his command, especially after gaining an additional 1,000 Russian soldiers. He had more ideas in his mind. For example, could he use the upcoming war with the Ilkhanate to create an opportunity for himself to escape? Just like Marguzim, once he escaped, the 5-star army would be like looking for a needle in a haystack if they wanted to catch him. In this way, as long as he avoided the other party's initial search, he could find a safe place to develop again. Once he grew stronger, it would be time for him to return to Eastern Europe and take back everything he had lost. Of course, it was still unknown whether Magus Maximus would be able to survive under the suppression of other forces. However, the conceited Ivan believed that with his ability and identity, he would have no problem surviving and growing stronger. It was precisely because there were too many thoughts in his mind that he couldn't calm down. As for Alaton's words, he couldn't listen. General Ivan, are you listening? After seeing Ivan's obviously distracted expression, Elton didn't continue talking and changed to calling him softly. Oh, I'm listening, please continue. After Ivan was woken up, he showed an apologetic expression and said. He wanted to calm down because his intuition told him that now wasn't the time to fight back. Yang Chendong must be paying attention to him. But there was another voice in his mind that kept calling him. If he didn't take this opportunity to fight back, he didn't know when the next opportunity would come. If that was the case, could he really keep waiting? Would his character and self-esteem allow him to do that? The strength of the Ilkhanate was average, and it wasn't a good partner to cooperate with. But he didn't expect the other party to really defeat the 5-star army. As long as the Ilkhanate's main force was delayed, it should be possible to create an opportunity for him to escape. Ailton said that in order to deal with the 5-star army, the Ilkhanate borrowed 300,000 cavalries from the other Khanates. 300,000 cavalries, they should be able to create some trouble for the 5-star army and make them unable to take care of him. At that time, his opportunity might come. Ivan was very clear about his own strength. He didn't want to leave in a daze. What he wanted was to kill Yang Chendong. Only in this way could the 5-star army be in chaos and he could return to Eastern Europe to reorganize. Compared to Maxim, who had disappeared without a trace after escaping and was now hiding in some unknown mountain, what he wanted to do was to retake Moscow and lead the Rossi people to stand up again. And he firmly believed that as long as there was no Yang Chendong in front of him, he might be able to do this. When he looked at Alting, who was still speaking with a fawning expression on his face, he couldn't help but feel a sense of uncertainty in his heart. Is such a person suitable to be my ally? Forget it. He seemed to have no other choice. In the situation where he didn't know when the next opportunity would be, he could only give it a try. Ivan suddenly got up and walked to the door of the tent. He saw that the person guarding the door was the former palace guard, and he was absolutely trustworthy. When he saw that there was nothing abnormal outside, he coughed and turned to Ailton. You're going to be in big trouble, do you know that? W.H. What? Ailton asked as if he didn't understand. But at this moment, his face had already turned pale, and he had an extremely terrified look on his face. He had revealed his cowardly side without a doubt. Chapter 1488. In the main tent, Dao Xiao, the captain of the 2nd Black Cavalry, who was responsible for monitoring Ivan's tent, was reporting the situation. It looks like everything is normal, there is no problem. Okay, you can go. Listening to Dao Xiao's words for a long time, Yang Chendong waved his hand. Dao Xiao retreated, leaving only Beta Persei in the tent. Seeing Yang Chendong's eyebrows seem to be frowning together, he asked puzzledly, Young master, didn't Captain Dao say that everything is normal? What are you worried about? Oh, normal is abnormal. Yang Chendong shook his head. He has an intuition that in the face of such a good opportunity, Ivan will do something. Because he firmly believes that the two of them are the same in their bones, they are the kind of people who are unwilling to live under someone else's roof, and they have strong national characteristics. The more so, the more impossible it is for such a person to truly surrender to another person. Now that there is no action, it doesn't mean that his temperament has changed, it's just that there is no suitable opportunity. In order to make the other party reveal their true colors, he deliberately strengthened the other party's military power in order to accelerate the other party's intention to rise. He doesn't believe that Ivan will continue to wait under the conditions of internal and external troubles. He will definitely do it, Yang Qindong firmly believes. Are the ninjas of Japan in place? Yang Qindong suddenly got up and asked as if he thought of something. Young master, Chuishiko has arrived. There are 50 ninjas with him. Beta Persei had already received the report, but because there were only 51 people, he didn't report this small matter. Very good, tell Chuishiko to come down and see me. Remember, see me secretly, no one except the Black Cavalry should know about this. Yang Qindong ordered. Just as Yang Qindong arranged everything in the main tent, the messenger of Ilkhanate, Alateng, was sitting in his tent with a pale face. If one took a closer look, they would notice that his body was trembling. Yes, Alerting was very scared at this moment. When he suddenly found that his efforts these days not only did not help the Ilkhanate, but also helped the tyrant, he hated himself to death. Why did he trust the 5-star army so much? They had actually made preparations to attack the Khanate behind his back. It was a pity that he was still kept in the dark and was still thinking of using peaceful means to solve the problem. If it wasn't for what Ivan had said to him today and even told him about the military plans of the 5-star army, he would probably still be full of longing for the future. The Han people's way of saying one thing and doing another made Alden completely lose hope in the peace talks. What he needed to do now was to send the general military plan of the 5-star army back to the Khanate. This was the most important thing. However, when he thought of the fully armed 5-star army soldiers outside the tent, how could he do that? General Ivan had already said that there was nothing he could do about this matter and that he needed to find a way himself. Solution? Where did the solution come from? When he thought of the failure of the peace talks, his value as an emissary would be gone, and he might even die here. His whole body was covered in cold sweat. He really didn't want to die. It was better to live than to die. When he thought of living, Alteng's gaze fell on his bag. There was a kind of herb inside. After eating it, people would foam at the mouth and become unconscious. It was like being poisoned. The process was no different from peeling off a layer of skin. The advantage was that he could recover after some treatment. Although he would have to suffer a lot, it was better than dying. This was originally the preparation he made before. If he couldn't go against the situation, he might be able to escape with this method. After all, the 5-star army didn't want an emissary to die in their camp. It wouldn't be good if word got out. People who were afraid of death were always strange, they would always think of all kinds of solutions. He originally thought that this time the peace talks would go smoothly and he wouldn't need to use this thing, but now it seems that he still had to take this step. Let's hope it can fool the 5-star army. Alteng sighed in his heart. He came to the bag, took out the herb disguised as a tea cake, got a cup of water, and swallowed it. About half an hour later, Yang Qindong was in the tent reading the telegram sent by Qian City. It said that the first batch of engines was finally replicated. With the help of a large number of books, and most importantly, with the help of realistic reference materials, the engine problem of the motorcycle was finally solved. Once there were no problems with the trial production, Yang Qindong would have the first batch of motorcycles. It would accelerate the transportation ability on land and increase the mobility of the 5-star army by more than one level. Just as he was sighing about the various benefits this initiative would bring, Deputy Captain Badeo Jiang, who was in charge of tonight's shift, walked in. Sixth young master, General Ivan suddenly sent a message saying that the emissary of the Ilkhanate is in critical condition. What should we do? His life is in danger? This sudden news interrupted Yang Qindong's train of thought. He couldn't help but raise his head and ask. Yes, that's what the report said. I've already arranged for the doctor to check on him. There should be a result soon. Badao Jiang nodded and replied. Just as they were talking, there was another report from outside the door. Then, the military doctor came in to report that the emissary named Alting was indeed poisoned. His condition was very bad, and he could die at any time. Sixth young master, the emissary is dying, but the military doctor said that he shouldn't die so quickly. After all, Alting is quite fat, so he should be able to last for a day or two. Should we send him away? Badao Jiang carefully suggested. Is this what you mean? Yang Chendong asked with interest after listening. No. No, this is what General Ivan said in his report. He thinks that since he's an emissary, he represents the face of the Ilkhanate. If such an important person dies in our camp, there will be a lot of problems. Since that's the case, it's best to send him away while he's still alive. We can ask the Ilkhanate to send another emissary here. Thinking of what Ivan said in his report, Badao Jiang said almost exactly the same thing. Yang Chendong heard that this was Ivan's idea, and a smile appeared on his face. Well, since that's the case, let's do as General Ivan said. After all, the emissary's problem has always been this person's responsibility, right? Hearing that Yang Chendong agreed, Badao Jiang nodded and turned around to pass on the order. Leaving Yang Chendong alone in the command tent, he closed the contents of the telegram and unconsciously hummed a tune that no one had heard before. Badao Jiang left the command tent and saw Ivan waiting anxiously 100 meters away. General Ivan, the sixth young master said that you've always been responsible for the emissary's problem. Since Alting is dying, immediately send him away and ask them to send another emissary. By the way, the emissary's food needs to be carefully checked in the future to prevent this from happening again. The last sentence was added by Badao Jiang himself. He felt that it was necessary to say it. And because of this sentence, the suspicion in Ivan's heart was dispelled. He even suspected that Yang Chendong had seen through his trick. But when he heard this sentence, his face relaxed a lot. Okay, I'll be careful in the future. Then I'll go arrange it. Ivan turned around and left, lamenting Alting's decisiveness in his heart. Originally, he was curious about how Alting would leave the 5-star army's camp. He didn't expect Alting to go all out and use such an extreme method. Although Ivan didn't know how Alting did it. But his intuition told him that Alting would be fine. At most, he would suffer a little. This was all because Alting was afraid of death, and people who were afraid of death would always think of many ways to survive. Ivan watched as the Ilkhanate's emissary group left. He looked at Alting, who was carried on a stretcher and didn't say a word from the beginning to the end, only foaming at the mouth from time to time. He was really worried. He was afraid that the medicine would be too strong and that Alting wouldn't be able to last until he saw Ilkhanate. But at this point, there was no use in hesitating. He had already told Alting about the 5-star army's attack plan, and it wouldn't be long before Ilkhanate knew about it. That would be equivalent to betraying the 5-star army. In that case, there was no turning back. I hope everything goes well. He sighed. At this moment, Ivan looked in the direction of the central camp. He knew that if the plan went well, his ultimate goal would be there. At that time, with his 500 palace guards, he might have a chance of winning. If he could really kill Yang Chendong, his plan would be a success. In the blink of an eye, 3 days had passed since Alting left. In these 3 days, they didn't see any emissaries from Ilkhanate. Not only that, just a moment ago, Commander Su Yunxing found out that a large number of cavalry had been mobilized in Ilkhanate's territory. From the looks of it, they were about to go to war. The sudden change was heard by some generals, and they couldn't understand it. Could it be that some information was leaked? Or did Ilkhanate have no intention of negotiating at all? They were just like him, using the peace talks to buy time, but were actually secretly preparing? In the central camp, Yang Chendong also received the battle report from the scout division. He raised his eyebrows, and his eyes revealed a trace of undetectable killing intent. Summon all generals above division level, come in for a meeting. In less than half an hour, all the officers above division level had arrived in the central camp. There were also a few people who were stationed far away, so they would catch up in a short time. But Yang Chendong didn't need to wait for them. Speed was the most important thing in war. Since the other side was already prepared, if he didn't act early, he would lose the initiative. Chapter 1489. Seeing that most of the people had arrived, Yang Chendong stood up from his seat. Following his action, everyone immediately fell silent. Everyone looked at Yang Chendong expectantly, waiting for his decision. Everyone, this king originally wanted to solve the problem of the Ilkhanate peacefully. However, there are some people who don't believe in heresy. They don't believe that our 5-star army is invincible. They still want to fight. Since this is the case, we should use our actions to tell some people that those who provoke our 5-star army will definitely die. Is everyone confident? Yes. The high-ranking officers all shouted in unison. Their voices were so loud that it seemed like they wanted to flip the roof of the tent over. Very good. Since that is the case, I will now announce the battle order. Considering that the Ilkhanate is already prepared, this time, we will change the attack plan appropriately. The initial battle plan will remain unchanged, but midway through, it will be. As Yang Chendong spoke, the battle plan changed accordingly. In the later stages, it was completely different from the original plan. It could even be described as a facade. Although he wasn't 100% sure that Ivan had already told Altan about the army's battle plan, he still made some changes for the sake of safety. It had to be said that this was the original battle plan in his heart. The previous battle plan was only used to test the waters. Hearing this plan, many of the officers revealed a shocked expression. They had a feeling that this plan was simply a copy of the first battle plan. It was to make up for the shortcomings of the first battle plan. It could also be said that it was a trap. It was a plan that was based on the first battle plan's defense. In the end, if someone knew about their previous battle plan and used it as a defense, then the second battle plan would beat them so badly that even their parents would not be able to recognize them. Yang Chendong's words were orders. His authority had already reached a level that no one dared to question. Thus, even though some of the officers had doubts in their hearts, no one raised them. Instead, they remembered their duty and mission. Then, they walked out of the tent and went to the army to arrange the battle. The tent that was originally packed with people quickly became spacious and empty. Yang Chendong's gaze also swept to Beta Persei. Young master, he. Beta Persei seemed to have been waiting for this scene to happen. When he saw Yang Chendong's gaze sweep over him, he had a flattering smile on his face and even straightened his body. Needless to say, when Beta Persei showed this expression, it was equivalent to asking for battle. Speaking of which, Yang Heir was a war maniac. What he should do the most was to lead an army into battle and demonstrate the value and significance of his existence by swinging his saber and chopping. It was not appropriate to let such a person stay by Yang Chendong's side. However, Yang Chendong still did so. It was all because by his side, he would come into contact with many confidential matters. Once these things were spread out, the consequences would not be small. They would be very serious. Therefore, it was necessary to use an absolutely loyal person to reassure him. Beta Persei was such a loyal person. Facts also proved that he knew a lot of those very confidential things, but did he not spread any of them? In order to compensate Beta Persei, Yang Chendong would also let him perform on the battlefield if there was a suitable opportunity. Now was the right time. Looking at the eager Beta Persei, Yang Chendong smiled and said, "Well, I know what you're thinking. How about this, I'll allow you to lead the Black Cavalry. Well, take 1,800 people with you. You only need to leave 200 people behind for Badaojiang." Hearing that he could lead the Black Cavalry to the battlefield, Beta Persei was extremely excited. But when he heard that he had to take away so many people at once and only leave 200 people behind, Beta Persei was still a little worried. "Young master, just leave, what? Don't you believe in the young master's strength?" Well, I'll let you go, so just go. You know, this time the other party has 300,000 cavalry. If we want to win, we need to break through the other party's camp at the first opportunity and not give them the slightest chance to resist. So we have to go all out. I also hope that the black cavalry can be like an invincible sharp knife, piercing straight into the enemy's heart. Can this mission be completed? Please rest assured, young master, I promise to complete the mission. Beta Persei was so excited that he stood at attention on the spot. Well, go and get ready. Remember, the sharp knife can't be unsheathed at will. Once it's unsheathed, it must see blood. Naturally, Yang Chendong would not treat the black cavalry dragon guards as ordinary cavalry. What he wanted was to see a miracle. This required them to learn to grasp the opportunity and not appear at the beginning of the battle and reveal their trump cards. After Beta Persei carefully pondered over this sentence, he nodded and said, "Please rest assured, Sixth Master, this little one will remember." Beta Persei left the tent and Ba Daojiang quickly walked in. "Sixth young master, everything has been arranged. But only 200 people are left. Second brother has also been sent out. Isn't it too dangerous?" Yang Chendong knew what Ba Daojiang was worried about, so he shook his head and said, "If we don't do this, some people won't be moved. Besides, we do need more sharp knives on the battlefield. The Ilkhanate is only our first opponent. There will be more enemies in the future. If we lose too many people in this battle, it won't be good for our next operations." At this moment, the 400,000 soldiers that Yang Chendong had brought with him looked mighty and powerful. But he knew better than anyone that this strength was only on the surface. At this time, they were facing the most important problem, which was that they had no backup. With their current location, no matter where they were too far away. Whether it was military supplies or soldiers, they couldn't replenish them immediately. Once they suffered a heavy blow, they could only retreat and return to Eastern Europe to replenish their supplies. Or they could charge forward and kill their way out to meet up with the new army and the new 5 armies in the Ilkhanate region. But it would be very difficult to break through the layers of obstacles. Since the situation was like this, it required Yang Chendong to take every step to inflict the greatest amount of damage to the enemy with the smallest price. And sending out as many troops as possible would increase their chances of winning. As for the danger they might encounter, it was nothing if they were prepared. "Ba Daojiang, have you obtained the firearms from the 2nd Division of Lingfeng?" "They are all here. The appropriate arrangements have been made." Ba Daojiang nodded heavily, his eyes filled with excitement. With these firearms, he wouldn't be afraid no matter how many enemies came. Ivan. He was only a commander of 2,000 people, and he wasn't qualified to participate in the military meeting that Yang Chendong was hosting. As such, he didn't know about the changes in the battle plan. Otherwise, with his intelligence, he would have given up all the prepared actions after knowing all of this. That way, Yang Chendong wouldn't have the chance to deal with him. As Ivan's subordinate, Qi Wen, one of the generals of the Golden Horde, was the current commander of the Meng Army's 3rd Division. The Meng Army is divided into 5 divisions, each of which has 40,000 people. The 1st Division commander is Wu Shugu, the 2nd Division commander is He, the 3rd Division commander is Qi Wen, the 4th Division commander is Baru, and the 5th Division commander is Wu Tua. The Forerunner Division has 100,000 people and is split into 2 divisions. The 1st Division is Ahuli, and the 2nd Division is Nikolov. The 1st Division has 50,000 people. In his tent, Ivan and a dozen other commanders of 2,000 people gathered and listened to the battle plan that General Qi Wen had arranged for them. Due to Yang Chendong's warning, no one knew if the Ilkhanate had bribed the generals to know about the battle plan in advance. Therefore, Qi Wen didn't mention anything about the change in the battle plan. He only said one sentence at the end of the meeting. On the battlefield, changes can happen at any time. It is very likely that we will have to make some changes according to these changes. When the time comes, everyone just needs to wait for orders. This was something that should be done. If they followed the designated route, no one could guarantee that there wouldn't be any unknown problems. Therefore, when the battle plan was changed, everyone who had led troops for many years was already used to it. Even Ivan didn't have any other thoughts after hearing this. He only knew that the 5-star army's battle plan didn't change, and that was enough. As long as the Ilkhanate was prepared, they would deal a heavy blow to the 5-star army, and then his chance would come. Ivan followed the others out of the tent of Qi Wen, the general of 30,000 men. Not far away, his captain Karela was waiting for him. The former deputy captain of his father-in-law's guards was one of the few people that Ivan could trust now. Gomzi, we have already inquired. In order to end this battle quickly, the Black Cavalry has also been dispatched. Someone saw Beta Persei leave the camp with 1,800 cavalrymen. At this moment, there are only 200 men left in the main tent to guard. Karela said in an excited but not loud voice as he walked beside Ivan. After he finished speaking, Karela still asked with a little worry, "Young master, you said this is a heaven-sent opportunity? Is it a trap waiting for us to jump in?" Karela was indeed worthy of being the deputy captain of the blind Grand Duke's guards. He was full of brains. Just from his words, it could be proved that he had indeed thought about the current situation. Ivan walked step by step towards his own camp, a pensive expression on his face. This battle was naturally important for the 5-star army. If they could defeat the Ilkhanate and the 300,000 cavalrymen in one fell swoop, their morale was bound to soar. It would also let the name of the 5-star army spread to some of the nearby khanates. This would undoubtedly play a strong deterrent role. In this way, the limelight would be unparalleled for a while, and it was not impossible for some people to surrender to the 5-star army. Chapter 1490. In order to achieve this goal, as well as to increase their chances of winning, Yang Chendong had sent out the most elite Black Knights, the Dragon Guards. It seemed that everything was normal, but for some reason, Ivan always had a feeling that everything was going too smoothly. Alatang's departure, the military operation plan was leaked, and even now, most of the guards around him were withdrawn. Yang Chendong seemed to be telling him, "Do you want to harm me? Do you want to make a move? Then come quickly, there won't be such a shop after this village." Since things were going too smoothly, Ivan felt a little unconfident. He had thought about it carefully. It seemed that everything that happened was so natural, and it seemed that it was because of his own efforts that this ending appeared. Wasn't this what he wanted? Then what was there to hesitate about? The most taboo thing for those who wanted to achieve great things was to be decisive. If it was very likely that victory would be brushed aside. So after thinking about it, Ivan decided to give it a try, because he was also worried about whether there would be a chance after this time. Especially once the 5-star army on the east and west sides converged, he was afraid that at that time, he, as an external general, would not have a chance to get close to Yang Chendong. At that time, how could he talk about revenge? It won't be a trap. Our plan is very thorough. Like this, don't do anything, act as usual, we just need to make a move when it's the most appropriate time. Ivan said carefully. He couldn't guarantee that no one among the 500 palace guards had secretly become Yang Chendong's spies. So except for these few people he trusted, before the matter was done, he wouldn't reveal a trace of information. Hearing Ivan's answer, Korea was relieved. Although their master was very young, he was an existence that even the Grand Duke of Blindness often praised. The 5-star army's attack began. Before the Ilkhanate was fully prepared, the first echelon of Air Force hot air balloons rose into the air and flew straight to the target. Not only could they play the role of Air Force reconnaissance, but they could also play the role of air bombers when they encountered a dense group of enemies. With the help of the engines, the hot air balloons moved faster and faster. Soon, hundreds of hot air balloons filled the entire sky above the battlefield. At this time, Harsanhan of the Ilkhanate was also mobilizing his army. Relying on the information brought back by Altang, he began to launch a counterattack against the 5-star army. Under Ha Linhan's command, 80,000 cavalrymen were sent to various locations on the battlefield. The pale-faced Alatang also came to the central tent. When he saw that the Great Khan had only sent out 80,000 cavalry, he asked with a puzzled look, "The cavalry of the other countries haven't arrived yet? How long has it been?" "No. They all arrived 3 days ago." Harsan Khan smiled proudly. This time, in order to support the Ilkhanate, the reinforcements sent by the other Ilkhanates arrived on time. With 300,000 cavalrymen in his hand, he had a great feeling that no one in the world could compete with him. Listening to Harsan Khan's proud answer, this time it was Alatang's turn to have a puzzled look. If that's the case, why didn't the Great Khan send out the army to block the 5-star army's attack direction and seize the initiative? "Oh, no hurry, let's wait and see first," Harsan Khan said slowly. Obviously, he didn't completely believe the information that Alatang exchanged with his life, and he also didn't believe the young man who was supposed to be the heir of the Ross Principality. After hearing this, Alatang's face turned red. However, he didn't know what to say. After all, he couldn't guarantee that Ivan was telling the truth. If there were any discrepancies, it would involve the lives of 300,000 cavalrymen. Even if he killed himself, he wouldn't be able to bear the responsibility. As expected, the commander of the alliance, Great Khan Harsan Khan, didn't completely believe the information that Ivan said. When the news was sent back, Yang Chendong let out a sigh of relief. This gave him more time to adjust his strategy. When Harsan Khan found out that Ivan's information wasn't wrong, he would definitely send out all his troops. This way, the 5-star army's revised attack plan could be put to use. At that time, it would be time to deal a heavy blow to the enemy and obtain victory. At this moment, Yang Chendong could almost see the scene of victory. But what he didn't know was that danger was surrounding him. 20 miles to the left of the 5-star Legion Corps, a force of 30,000 Mongol cavalry was hiding in a dense forest. Just from the fact that these cavalrymen were holding grass in their hands, their horses were wrapped in their hooves, and the fact that 30,000 people were piled up together without making a single sound, one could tell that this was an extremely elite cavalry force. If Yang Chendong was here, he would be able to recognize at a glance that the leader of this group of generals was the one who had disappeared for a long time, the one who once had an illustrious reputation on the grassland, Master Tolos. This was a group of elite Mongolian cavalrymen led by Yeshen. Ever since they were defeated and forced to leave, Yeshen brought 60,000 cavalrymen and escaped from the 5-star army's line of sight. In order to hide their tracks, they were very careful along the way. They passed through dense forests and walked through deserts. They would go wherever there were fewer people. Furthermore, in order to make the 5-star army forget about them, they would hide wherever there was human habitation. Sometimes, in order to avoid people, they would take a detour of tens or even hundreds of li to completely hide their tracks. It had to be said that Yeshen's way of doing things really made the Yangxia intelligence department lose track of them. As a result, they settled down in a deserted area in the desert and stayed there for 5 years. Although the place they chose was remote, there were water plants and it was a good place to graze. With such a place to rest, Yeshen's tribe began to slowly heal their wounds. If nothing unexpected happened, perhaps they would become strong again in 20 years. At that time, it would be time for them to take revenge on the 5-star army. Of course, the sky was full of unforeseen winds and clouds, and man's fate was uncertain. One day, Yeshen drank a lot of wine in his tent and coughed up blood. After the wizard's examination, he was told that his body was sick and that he only had a year to live at most. These words were like a bolt from the blue, causing Yeshen's face to turn pale. After that, he locked himself in his tent for 3 days. In these 3 days, he didn't see a single person. Apart from eating and drinking, he didn't talk to anyone. On the 4th day, he walked out of his tent and made a decision. He wanted to find Yang Chendong and take revenge. He wanted to use the last year of his life to complete his life's greatest goal. Just like this, apart from leaving behind a few youths to General Buru to protect their homeland and reproduce, he chose the most elite 30,000 people. With Bo Muir, one of the 4 great generals, as his deputy, they walked out of the desert and embarked on the journey to find Yang Chendong. Since last autumn, they had walked out of the desert and searched for Yang Chendong's whereabouts. As the days passed, Yeshen had his own worries. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to find Yang Chendong in his last days. If that happened, he wouldn't have any hope of revenge. Even if he died, he wouldn't be able to rest in peace. Perhaps the heavens didn't disappoint those who were willing. Finally, the cavalry scouts sent back news that Yang Chendong had appeared. He appeared in the region west of the Ilkhanate. When he heard this news, Yeshen's eyes couldn't help but shed tears. That was a sign of his excitement. After that, he led the 30,000 cavalrymen to the back of the 5-star Army's main camp. The news from the cavalry scouts had once made Yeshen feel discouraged. When he heard that Yang Chendong had brought 400,000 cavalry, he thought that he had no hope of revenge. After all, 30,000 against 400,000, and they were the elites of the 5-star Army, he had no chance of victory. However, yesterday, he suddenly received news that the 5-star Army had set out, splitting into more than 10 groups to kill their way towards the Ilkhanate. Yeshen once again knelt on the ground. He wanted to thank the heavens for giving him this opportunity for revenge. In particular, when he found out that his target Yang Chendong's commander flag was still in the central camp and hadn't moved. He didn't follow his subordinates to the front lines. He knew that his chance had come. "Leader, should we send someone to scout? It would be best if we can confirm that Yang Chendong is indeed in the central camp before we make our move. That way, it would be safer." Deputy General Bo Mu gave his opinion in an experienced manner. "We don't have time." Yeshen shook his head and rejected this suggestion. He didn't know when the 5-star Army would return after setting out. What if they didn't wait for the right opportunity and the other party's main force returned? If that was the case, wouldn't he be wasting this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity? Yeshen didn't want to regret anymore. He decided to give it a try even if it didn't work. Even if they all died here, at least he had worked hard and fought for his goal. Let everyone have a good rest. Before dawn, the army will start moving and raise our Khan flag. This time, I want Yang Chendong to die with a clear understanding. Ha ha ha. Yeshen laughed loudly as he made the final decision of his life. At this time, Yang Chendong didn't know that he had been targeted. Both the scouts and the hot air balloons in the sky had done their scouting and had come to the same conclusion. The 300,000 cavalrymen that the Ilkhanate had fought so hard for were all in a defensive position. No one took the initiative to attack, and no one dared to take the initiative to attack. Therefore, the rear of the army was arranged very well. This time, in order to use the fastest and most ruthless method to deal a heavy blow to the enemy, Yang Chendong had sent out all of his 400,000 troops. The only ones left behind were some medical personnel and the 200 black cavalry soldiers. Chapter 1491. Yang Chendong even purposely separated his provisions camp because there were tens of thousands of cavalrymen in charge of guarding the provisions. Once these people were by his side, he had to worry about whether Ivan, who had designs on him, would dare to make a move. It could also be said that Yang Chendong was willing to risk his life in order to convince Ivan of his death and also to give an explanation to the blind duke and the nobles and generals of the Ross Duchy who surrendered to him. If he doesn't come, then I will only look down on his courage, After letting out a cold snort, Yang Chendong sat in the tent and slowly flipped through an ancient book. It was as if he didn't know that danger would come at any time. Ba Daojiang, who was waiting at the side, was a little nervous, but after seeing Yang Chendong's performance, he calmed down a lot. He was infected by Yang Chendong's performance. Thinking of this, there were 200 black cavalry armed to the teeth with muskets. Even if Ivan came, what was there to be afraid of? He was just coming to die. Would Ivan really come? The answer was yes. The central camp was so empty. When the news reached Ivan's ears, he had a feeling that Yang Chendong had already seen through his thoughts and set up this formation to wait for him to appear. But even so, knowing that it was a trap, Ivan decided to jump into it. On this point, he and Yeshen had the same idea. If he didn't make a move this time, it would be difficult to wait for such a suitable opportunity. Knowing that there was a tiger in the mountain, but still going to the tiger's mountain. At this time, Ivan was determined to fight to the death. After hearing that there were only 200 black cavalry and nearly 1,000 medics in the camp, there were no other soldiers, he who was advancing according to Commander Chiwen's orders suddenly stopped. Along with him were the 500 former palace guards. It was time to make things clear to these people. When Ivan said that he was going to return to the Middle Corps camp and take Yang Chendong's head, Zhang Ruochen was shocked. The faces of some of the 500 palace guards who were unaware of what had happened changed drastically. It was true that they used to be guards of the palace and had received the favor of the Grand Duke of Blindness. Logically speaking, his former master was the monarch. If the monarch wanted the subject to die, the subject had no choice but to die. However, ever since they surrendered to the 5-star army, the treatment they received was no worse than the former palace guards. Most importantly, they saw too many of their clansmen who had been promoted because of their military exploits. Originally, when the 5-star army said that everyone was equal when it came to military merits, some people didn't believe it. However, reality slapped them in the face. Because of this, everyone's enthusiasm was aroused and they saw hope in life. Since others could get a military position and excellent treatment through military merits, why couldn't they also be indomitable men? Just when everyone was holding their breath and wanted to get more military merits through hard work and desperation in this battle, it turned out that their master's son actually wanted them to rebel. This psychological contrast could be imagined. For a time, many people's faces showed signs of struggle. For everyone to have such a performance, it was already in Ivan's plan. During this period of time, he had also carefully observed that these guards under his command were indeed attracted by the military merits of the 5-star army. Some of them were far more enthusiastic than before when they were training. This was another important reason why Ivan still decided to make a move even though he knew that Yang Chendong might have noticed his rebellion. He was worried that after a long time, these guards would be loyal to the 5-star army. If that was the case, he wouldn't be able to find help when he had the chance. Just based on this point, he had to rebel. He had to rebel now. The famous Ivan the Great in history wasn't called for nothing. When it came to bewitching people, he wasn't much worse than the earliest political commissars of the 5-star army. He acted as if he didn't see the hesitation on everyone's faces and said, "You are all people that father-in-law once trusted. You are all the most outstanding youths of the Ross clan. You are all the future hope of the Ross clan. You shouldn't stay in the 5-star army and be enslaved by the Han people. Even our descendants will be born as slaves. On the contrary, we should be the ones standing at the top. Now, I am willing to invite everyone to fight for the future of the Ross clan. In the future, your names will be remembered by future generations. Your descendants will also be happy and proud to have ancestors like you. Brave warriors, please take out your sabers and wave your arms. Let's fight for the future of the Rossi clan. I, Ivan, hereby promise that no matter who you are, those who die in battle will be remembered forever. Those who survive will also enjoy endless glory and wealth. Now, let me ask you, are you willing to fight with this young master?" When he said this, Ivan intentionally glanced at Karela and a few other confidants in the crowd. Karela and the others, who had been waiting in the crowd for a long time, immediately waved their arms and shouted loudly, "Yes, yes." This shout, perhaps due to the crowd mentality, or perhaps because Ivan's eloquence was too good, painted a grand blueprint for everyone. In short, more and more people shouted that they were willing. In the end, all 500 warriors shouted in unison, as if anyone who fell behind was a coward. The morale was raised, and everyone's enthusiasm was aroused. Finally, a satisfied look flashed across Ivan's face. Good. Now, everyone, follow this young master. Let's kill Yang Chendong and rebuild the Ross nation. Kill Yang Chendong and rebuild the Ross nation. Under the lead of Karela and the others, the shouts became louder and louder. Amidst the shouts, the 500 cavalrymen followed Ivan, who had already rushed out, and charged towards the central camp. Ivan's troops, who were less than 10 miles away from the central camp, separated from the main force when the sky turned dark. Because the order to retreat did not reach the ears of the 1,500 soldiers, they continued to advance according to the set goal, so the nearby allies did not notice this change. By the time they realized that something was wrong, the battle had already ended. As for the 200 black cavalry soldiers who stayed in the central camp, although the sky was already dark, none of them felt sleepy. This was because they knew that the real danger was about to come. Other than Yang Chendong, Ba Daojiang had the highest military rank among those who stayed behind. Before the sky turned dark, he had already called for the director of the field hospital that accompanied them to hide in the tent with the medical staff. No matter what happened outside, they were not allowed to come out. This was an order. The director was also confused. This was not the first time he had encountered a field hospital and a central military tent in the military camp. After all, they were non-combat troops and could play a very good role in treating the wounded. They did not need to go to the battlefield and would still be protected. But this time, it was the first time he encountered a situation where only 200 black cavalry soldiers were left in the central camp. Yang Chendong was Yang Xie's leader, the leader of the 5-star army. Leaving only 200 people to protect him was really puzzling. Could it be that there was a deeper meaning behind this? Although he was puzzled, the director did not dare to ask. He knew the rules of the army. If you should know, someone would naturally tell you. If you should not know, even if you asked around, you would not get any results. If you were not careful, someone might talk to you. If that was the case, you would be in trouble. Following Ba Daojiang's orders, the director arranged for the medical staff to stay in a few dozen tents. After giving them some short knives and other defensive weapons, he told them not to come out without orders. Even if they needed to go to the toilet, they could only do it in the tents. When the order was given, although many people were confused, no one dared to disobey a military order. As soon as these people hid themselves, a slight tremor came from the ground. A black night dragon guard who was in charge of night duty immediately ran to Ba Daojiang and saluted, reporting to the vice captain. Judging from the sound, it should be from the northeast. Got it. Continue to investigate, Ba Daojiang said with a serious face. At the same time, he muttered in his heart, it better not be that Ivan who came to seek death. Otherwise, I will not be polite. About 3 minutes later, another soldier from the 5-star army came to report that there were about 500 cavalry soldiers. They were flying the flag of the 3rd Regiment of the Meng Army's 3rd Division. They were now less than 4 miles away from them. 3rd Regiment of the Meng Army's 3rd Division. After Ba Daojiang finished, he suddenly raised his head and said, "Do not let them come close to the camp. If they don't listen to the guards can do whatever they want." Ba Daojiang had a good memory. Because of the 6th young master's attention to Ivan, he knew that Ivan was serving in the 3rd Regiment of the Meng Army's 3rd Division. He did not believe that this was a coincidence. After the order was given, the original 10 guards quickly increased to 20 people. 10 of them were holding the 95-style swords, while the other 10 were riding on horses. This was to ensure that no matter if someone came close or tried to escape, they would be able to counterattack. The 20 black cavalry soldiers worked well together. Although there were only 20 of them, they gave off a feeling of an iron wall. This was Yang Xie's most elite combat team. Following Ba Daojiang's order, the soldiers shouted in the night to stop moving forward. However, it did not seem to be of any use. The horses were still approaching them. At this time, the number of black cavalry soldiers guarding the camp had increased to 100. Ba Daojiang could tell that there were about 500 horses. He was afraid that if there were too few soldiers guarding the camp, the enemy would rush in and threaten the 6th young master's safety. Chapter 1492. Ba Daojiang saw it as a huge test for him to be able to stay behind and bear such an important responsibility. He knew that no one in Yang Xie could defeat Yang Chendong in terms of individual strength. However, he still hoped to protect the 6th young master and not give him a chance to make a move. This was what a qualified Longwei should do. Ba Daojiang was already paying attention to the enemy, but he still neglected one thing, Ivan's cunning. Just like how Yang Chendong was creating opportunities for the enemy to make a move, Ivan also felt that although the opportunity seemed good, it was also very dangerous. Therefore, he couldn't attack according to conventional methods. He had chosen to use the art of war to create a diversion. There were only 100 cavalrymen on the 500 war horses. They were responsible for feinting a frontal attack to attract the attention of the black cavalry. As for himself, he led the remaining 405 palace guards in 3 different directions and sneaked into the main camp on foot. Even though there were 400 of them, Ivan didn't intend to let them attack together. His goal was simple, to kill Yang Chendong. In order to achieve this goal, so what if he had to sacrifice the 500 people around him? In the eyes of those who wanted to achieve great things, they didn't care about trifles. In order to achieve their goals, they often used unscrupulous means. The lives of some lowly guards were nothing. Ivan's ruthlessness was beyond Ba Daojiang's expectations. Perhaps it was because of the different education methods they received. The former was willing to sacrifice everything to achieve their goals and viewed life as nothing. The latter valued the lives of his comrades more than the heavens. This difference in ideology was destined to make the latter suffer. Ivan approached the central camp on foot. He didn't see the black cavalry in the dark, but he believed that it wasn't that they didn't exist. It was just that the enemy hid well and he couldn't see them. He had a feeling that there were many pairs of eyes in the dark searching for him. When he thought about the 100 cavalrymen he sent to lure the enemy in, he knew that he didn't have much time left. Send the signal to the first squad. Tell them to attack. Ivan's eyes flashed with a vicious glint in the dark. Karela, who was beside him, agreed and lit the torch beside him. He raised it up and circled it around him. That was the signal to attack. 100 palace guards responded and rushed out from the east side of the central camp, charging out with lightning speed. There are enemies in the east. Stop them. Ba Daojiang heard the commotion from the east and immediately gave the order. A group of 30 black cavalry soldiers charged forward. However, 3 minutes later, another wave of battle cries came from the north. Ba Daojiang's eyes widened in shock. He wasn't sure how many people there were on the other side, but he was sure that it was impossible for the central tent to not be affected. 30 men, go to the north. Ba Daojiang once again gave the order to split up his forces. Then, he stared at his surroundings. He had a feeling that the enemies from the south would appear next. Sure enough, about 3 minutes later, battle cries could be heard from the south, and it seemed to be louder than the sounds from the north and east. Ba Daojiang couldn't stay calm anymore. He decided to report this to Yang Chendong. As soon as Hakudo Jiang turned around, Yang Chendong, who was wearing a golden cape, walked out of the tent and stood behind him. Go. Leave 10 people behind for me. For some reason, after hearing Yang Chendong's calm voice, Ba Daojiang, who was still a little flustered, instantly calmed down. Yes. Ba Daojiang saluted and left a squad of black cavalry soldiers behind. He led 40 men and charged towards the south, where the battle cries were the loudest. Beside the bonfire in front of the main tent, Yang Chendong in his golden cloak was particularly eye-catching. Perhaps this was his way of telling the enemy in the dark that he was here. If they wanted to take his life, they could come now. Otherwise, they wouldn't have the chance. Just as Yang Chendong looked into the darkness, a figure suddenly appeared in front of him. Then, there were more than a dozen, until there were more than 100 of them. The leader of this group was young Master Ivan of the Ross Duchy. You're finally here. Yang Chendong's voice was unhurried as he looked at the face that was revealed under the light of the bonfire. That's right, I'm here. What do you think? You didn't seem to think that you would lose the bait and lose the fish when you baited the fish. Ifan strode forward until he was 20 meters away from Yang Chendong before he stopped. He then asked aloud in a victorious manner. The outcome hasn't been decided yet. It's too early to say anything. I'm just curious. Don't you know how much effort your father-in-law put in to save your life? What you're doing now is equivalent to playing with fire. You're putting yourself in danger. This time, no one can save you. Yang Chendong looked at Ivan and said calmly. His face was full of curiosity. Playing with fire? Ivan chuckled, then squatted down beside the bonfire. He stretched out his hands and slowly moved them around the bonfire as if he was trying to warm himself. If you don't play with fire now, sooner or later, our Ross nation will be cooked by your slow fire. Am I right? Yang Chendong wasn't surprised that Ivan could see this. After all, he was Emperor Ivan the Great. His EQ and IQ were so high that ordinary people couldn't compare to him. Being able to think of this was also within Yang Chendong's expectations. Otherwise, he wouldn't have needed to set up such a trap to lure the other party. It could be said that from the beginning, Yang Chendong didn't have any intention of underestimating Ivan. That was why they had this conversation, this seemingly life-or-death crisis. If Yang Chendong had ignored the other party, he was afraid that his head would have been cut off by the other party without him even knowing it. Smart. Talking to smart people really saves a lot of trouble. If that's the case, then you should know that I can't only have 200 black cavalry guarding me, right? Yang Chendong asked with a mocking tone. Ivan, who was still in a victorious posture, couldn't help but tremble after hearing this sentence. Then, his eyes involuntarily scanned the surroundings. When he saw that there were no changes, he couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. When he looked at Yang Chendong, his eyes had a hint of viciousness. What? Do you still want to play tricks at a time like this? Or are you afraid and want to wait for the other black cavalry to come to your aid? Let me tell you, Ivan, won't give you such a chance. Come, charge and kill Yang Chendong. Whoever can do it, this young master will share the world with him. With great rewards, there will be brave men. Not to mention, those who were still by Ivan's side were the staunchest Rossi nationalists. They were the kind of people who would rather give up their lives to see the rise of their nation. Therefore, this shout was equivalent to an order. 100 guards shouted and charged with their swords raised. Protect the sixth young master. The remaining 10 Black Knight Dragon guards quickly tore off the black cloth behind their backs, revealing 10 shiny 95-style guns that had been polished with gun oil. No need, these people are all brave warriors, let them die under my sword. Yang Chendong said with a smile, as if he didn't take the enemies in front of him seriously. This scene happened to be seen by Ivan. For some reason, he had a bad feeling in his heart. Although he did check the movements of the various armies and observed the surroundings before making a move, he was sure that there were no reinforcements from the 5-star army nearby. But there was always a possibility. This King Wunan of Damyang was someone who had conquered many places. Who knew if he had also conquered some powerful factions and teams when he conquered other nations? Just as Ivan's face was filled with suspicion, a series of screams suddenly sounded in his ears. As far as the eye could see, the palace guards suddenly fell to the ground one after another. Then, dozens of black figures appeared where they had been standing. They were all dressed in black, and even their faces were covered by black cloth, making it impossible to see their faces. These people had a common characteristic, and that was that compared to the tall and strong white Russians, they were usually shorter. Yes, these people were ninjas. Led by the special ninja under the Kurosawa, they were a surprise force arranged by Yang Chendong near the central army tent. The only thing that gave Ivan a headache was when he didn't give himself away. Once he decided to make a move, there was nothing to be afraid of. Because with the 500 palace guards in his hands, it was impossible for him to threaten Yang Chendong. If it wasn't for the fact that he needed evidence, he could have just sent a cavalry team to eliminate him. With the appearance of the ninjas, Yang Chendong became a spectator. Unknowingly, there was a large chair under his butt. He was sitting on it next to a bonfire. It was April, so the night was still very cold. Who are you people? Why are you helping the evildoer? If you retreat now, this Gongzi can pretend that nothing happened. Even though he knew it was useless, Ivan still shouted it out. This was his only hope now. Unfortunately, His shout didn't attract any response. It wasn't that the Kurosawa disdained to talk to him, but Ivan shouted in Russian. The other party couldn't understand, so how could they respond? Yang Qindong, who understood, laughed and replied for the Kurosawa. They are ninjas from the Japanese province. They like to use the environment to kill people without leaving a trace. Hee hee, if we were to fight on horseback, these ninjas might not be your match. But in the darkness, on land, they are the true kings. Even this king's black cavalry can't compare. Chapter 1493. Ninjas from the Japanese province? They're actually not Han people. You actually dared to arrange such a strong force to protect you. Aren't you afraid that they'll betray you and do something that's not beneficial to you? Ivan asked in shock. At the very least, if it was him, he definitely wouldn't trust the strength of a foreign race so easily. Betray me? Why would they do that? Although the current Japanese people aren't the same as before, they've all moved away. But no matter where they go, as long as they're in my Yangxia territory, they can live a better and more stable life. They should be happy and satisfied right now, right? How could they think of harming this king? Ivan, not everyone is like you, an ungrateful wretch. Yang Qindong took this opportunity to mock Ivan. Bah! They're all fools. They were tricked by you, deceived by you. I'm sure they'll regret it in the future. Ivan shouted with a look of disagreement. Then, with tears in their eyes, they watched as the guards beside them were killed one by one. Many of them had only raised their swords to slash at the air before they were stabbed in the body or vital parts of their bodies from an unknown direction and died in battle. They won't regret it. As long as they can live a good life, who would rebel? Giving up a good life and risking their lives for an unknown future, who would be so stupid? Of course, it's undeniable that there are still some determined people who will do all kinds of things, but unfortunately, you won't be able to see it, right? Oh, you have to remember, the people who killed you weren't this king, but these Japanese ninjas. At the end of Yang Qindong's words, he seemed to have thought of something happy and laughed out loud. When Ivan heard all of this, his face was full of anger and unwillingness. Yang Qindong, you're too ruthless, too ruthless. Ivan's ruthlessness wasn't because Yang Qindong killed 500 of his people without blinking, but because the people who killed him were Japanese ninjas. And after Yang Qindong spread the news, if there were still Russian loyalists, the next target of their revenge would not be Yang Qindong, but these ninjas. This was simply a diversion of disaster. This move could be said to solve many problems once and for all. In this way, Yang Qindong would be completely out of the picture. Wasn't this ruthless enough? Thinking that from now on, even if his father-in-law who was under house arrest heard the news, he would only hate these ninjas even more, Ivan decided to escape. With the appearance of these kings of the darkness, it was impossible for him to kill Yang Qindong. Since that's the case, it's better to escape, at least he can't let Yang Qindong's treacherous plan succeed. Thinking like this, he said to Karela, who was still standing in front of him to protect him. I'll leave this place to you, this Gongzi will take good care of your family in the future. Karela was stunned for a moment, but he quickly nodded. Don't worry, Gongzi. Leave this place to me. Good. Ivan was touched to have such a loyal subordinate, but just as he nodded, before he could turn around to escape, Karela already fell to the ground with a plop. At this moment, blood was trickling out from his eyebrows. Just like that, Karela died without even being able to defend. The one who killed him was the special shinobi, Kuishi. His figure was floating towards Ivan's position at this moment. The dark environment seems to be prepared for ninjas, this is their natural hunting ground. As Yang Qindong said, in this environment, ninjas can exert their full strength. In this environment, even if the black cavalry encountered them, it would be difficult for them to defeat them. Of course, it's also very difficult for ninjas to break through the black cavalry's most elite armor. Perhaps the final result would be a tie. In terms of defense, the black cavalry's tyrannical equipment is naturally unbreakable. In terms of offense, the ninja's illusory figure and tricky technique can be said to be invincible. After killing Karela, Blast Ishii set his next target on Ivan. Ivan's IQ was very high, and his heart was also very big. Especially in the later years of his life, he was even more meticulous, which led to his title of Ivan the Great. But in terms of power, he was only a little stronger than ordinary people, but still inferior to the fierce generals in the army. Now that he's so young, how could he be the opponent of Kuishi? When the swords suddenly attacked in the dark night, he only saw a black shadow move. After he said the words so fast, in his heart, his whole body trembled and he fell backwards. Ninjas have always been the main way to kill people, and after a successful attack, they will leave. Unless it's a last resort, they won't entangle with the target and the opponent. Special ninja Kazushige Ishikawa used it to the extreme. Under the cover of darkness, he slashed Ivan's neck with just one blow. When the main artery continued to spurt out blood, he had already left and went to the next target. Ivan died like this. Quietly looking up at the starry night sky with a posture of looking up. His face was not ferocious, but also not peaceful. If you look carefully, there is a trace of confusion and unwillingness. Ivan's death proved a fact. That is, there will be no more Ivan the Great in history. His life was completely changed because of meeting Yang Chendong, and it was ended in advance. Just less than 2 minutes after Ivan's death, no White Russian soldiers could be seen outside the main tent. All of them died in the hands of a team of 50 ninjas. Their death only resulted in minor injuries to 3 ninjas. From the beginning to the end, 10 black cavalry stood around Yang Chendong to protect him, and they didn't even move a finger, and the matter was over. Very good, Kuishi, your task was done very well, and you will be rewarded. Yang Chendong said with a smile on his face. Thank you for the king's praise, this is what we should do. Kuishi said without the slightest emotion. Since they surrendered to Yang Chendong, these ninjas didn't have to worry about their livelihood and food. They could focus on training, and they became the primitive ninjas who didn't care about the world and only cared about martial arts. All of this is because of Yang Chendong. Now, they just killed some people for him, it's not a big deal. Good. Kuishi's attitude made Yang Chendong very satisfied. Then the space fell into silence. Yang Chendong didn't mean to let them leave, he wanted to do some things more seriously. Even so, it's not time for these ninjas to leave. At this time, the sound of gunshots could be heard in the night, and sometimes there was the sound of U-5 style. From this, it can be seen that the battle on the other battlefields is very fierce. About 10 minutes later, the first team returned, and soon the second team appeared, until the third team led by Hashirama returned. Hashirama was the one who was most worried about the safety of this place, but his opponents were twice as many as the others. He led 40 black cavalry to fight for a while, but even so, he was still a little late compared to the others. When he returned to the main tent, he saw the corpses lying on the ground. He couldn't help but ask anxiously. Is the 6th young master okay? It's okay, thanks to the appearance of the ninjas. They killed Ivan and the rebels he brought with him. Well, how's your situation? Are there any casualties? Yang Chendong deliberately mentioned the ninjas in order to deepen everyone's impression. Reporting to the 6th young master, 7 of our black cavalry were injured, no one died. At the same time, we also captured a total of 73 rebels. Hearing that Yang Chendong was fine, Hashirama could finally breathe a sigh of relief, so he said in a deep voice. Good. Interrogate them well, before it is announced, these people can't die. Hearing that so many people were captured, Yang Chendong's face showed a satisfied look. There were some things that couldn't be said by himself. If you said that Ivan rebelled, then so be it. There had to be evidence. Now, these 73 people were the witnesses. As long as this battle was won, he could push out these 73 people in front of everyone, and the news of Ivan's rebellion would spread everywhere. At that time, no one would be able to use this matter to blame him. After the order, the medical staff who had been hiding in the big tent also came out of the tent and began to check the wounds of the 7 black cavalry, and bandage the wounds of the 73 captives. These people are very important, and before the facts are clarified, there can't be any problems. Ivan is finally dead, the crisis has been resolved. Yang Chendong returned to the big tent to rest. As for the other black cavalry, only half of them were left to guard with the ninjas, and the rest went to rest. In everyone's view, they just need to wait for the results of the victory on the front line. But they didn't know that a bigger crisis is coming step by step. Because Ivan's rebellion was too close to the main army camp, the Wara scouts who were responsible for intelligence didn't see it too clearly. But the gunshots and shouts were still heard by them, and it was passed back to the leader Yeshen's ears. Such a thing happened, which was somewhat beyond Yeshen's expectation. He couldn't figure out what had happened, but one thing was for sure. Last night, there must have been a massacre in the 5-star Army's camp. Maybe someone rebelled, or the army of Ilkhanate killed their way to the main army camp. But in any case, this has nothing to do with Yeshen. Unless he can be sure that Yang Chendong is dead, he will never stop. Well, the order is passed down, everyone take the time to rest, we will set off tomorrow at dawn, this time we won't stop until we achieve our goal. You're tuning in to the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.